Hey there, welcome to Bedtime Chills. Tonight, we're diving into 3 hours of terrifying true stories set to the soothing sounds of rain, perfect for keeping you calm while sending chills down your spine. If these tales leave you unsettled, hit that like button, share with friends, and subscribe to join our chilling community. I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time of day is it for you? Drop a comment below. Now, get comfortable and let the terror begin. This took place 2 summers ago in the hometown of the Cowboys. I am aware of human trafficking in this city. A coworker of mine was pulled out of work and placed in a safe house by the FBI because she finally decided to report her family. However, I never thought they randomly snatched people. In all the stories, they use substances or coercion. 2 summers ago, I was cycling to a smoke shop. It was a bit out of my way, in a not-so-great neighborhood, but I felt confident. It was daylight, I rode all over the city, and I knew the store. I was 24, short, and had short pink hair, but I always considered myself too intimidating to kidnap. I often forgot that, even though I'm a veteran, I'm also a short white girl. I pulled up to a crosswalk and waited for the light when 2 Hispanic men started catcalling me from a windowless white van. The van had no identification or stickers. Even the way they yelled at me was odd. It wasn't the typical, nice, or crude locker room comments. They talked to each other and then yelled through a cracked window, saying, "We are gonna get you, and you are next." It felt unsettling, like they were excited. I just flipped them off and rode away. End of story, right? Over a mile later, I was right around the corner from my destination. To set this scene, there was a massive empty lot, really more like 2 lots, on my right. That was the side I was riding down. To my left was the back fence of a very old, probably abandoned house. The area was like that all around, mostly drifters or elderly people living in poverty with a few trap houses scattered about. There was no one else visible, and even if someone had seen this, they probably wouldn't have said anything for their own safety. I was pedaling along when the album I was listening to ended. I thought, I'm almost there. I'm not going to stop and fumble with my phone. That decision saved my life. As I was thinking this, a white van pulled up on my left and stayed just within my peripheral vision. They revved the engine a few times, trying to spook me, but something told me not to react. Don't let them know I knew. So, I acted as though my music was playing and pedaled a little faster. Up ahead, there was a brick wall to my left with a tall tree hanging over it, just before a quick alley entrance. Suddenly, the van punched the gas, pulling up in front of me and stopping next to the brick wall. They were trying to corner me, forcing me into a position where I would have to ride between their door and the wall. This all happened in a span of maybe 7 seconds. I didn't feel panic. I didn't actively register any fear. It was as though someone much calmer took over and said, "Nope." Instinctively, I crossed the street without even thinking about the movements or why. As I pedaled past their other side, I realized it was the same van from earlier. Now, it had a window repair magnet on the side. The magnet looked too small to be legitimate and had no contact information, just a generic name. I kept glancing back and noticed no one was in the front seat, but there was movement behind the seats. The men were in the back near the door. They had planned to drag me off my bike, right off the street, and do God knows what. Once I was past them, they scrambled into the front seats and sped off so fast they burned rubber. I made it to the store safely, but I still hate myself for not getting their license plate number. Not that it would have done much good, they probably swapped the plates out later. I knew I had narrowly avoided being kidnapped and possibly killed, or worse. But it wasn't until I told this story to someone from Mexico that I realized these were traffickers. They said it sounded sadly familiar and that it happens all the time. I have no family, and my roommates are just roommates. If I had been taken, it would have been 3 to 7 days before anyone realized something was wrong. By then, all anyone would have known was that I left on my bike and vanished. I could have been across the border or dead before anyone even realized I was gone. When I was about 8 years old, my parents were going through a divorce, and my older sister and I used to spend a lot of time at our grandparents' house. It was a long, ranch-style home on a corner in a very nice neighborhood, just a 10-minute walk from a gas station, grocery store, and a few fast food restaurants. The streets were long and lined with well-manicured houses, cradled by big, scenic California valley hills all around. We were never very wealthy, but my grandpa bought it as a fixer-upper many years ago, and the property value has skyrocketed since then. As you can imagine, it was a very safe spot, and although there were many other kids in the neighborhood, it wasn't uncommon to see neighbors walking their dogs or pushing strollers down the sidewalk outside our house. Although my mom was especially protective all our lives, this particular neighborhood was densely populated, and my family knew just about everyone who lived there. She grew up in that neighborhood herself, so she was understandably trusting. Once in a while, she would let my sister and me walk to the Rotten Robbie gas station on the other end of the block to grab a snack. I would always get a ring pop, and my sister would grab a Three Musketeers before we made our way back home. My sister was about 11 at the time, and this small amount of freedom was a really big deal to us. Nothing compared to walking down that street all by ourselves in the summertime, laughing and joking around, a couple of dollar bills in our pockets. I felt like I owned the world. The one oddity I ever noticed around the neighborhood was a small camper parked on the side of the road opposite the gas station, right along the backside of the fence of another house. It sat there in the shade like a permanent fixture, all the windows constantly covered by opaque beige curtains. I can't explain why, but it always gave me this deep sense of foreboding whenever I passed it. I was almost positive someone was living inside because, at times, I'd hear the air conditioning running as it sat stagnant in that same spot. The hairs on my neck would always stand on end as I walked past it, particularly as I approached the camper door, and I'd always keep an eye on it, fearing that one day it might swing open just as I came close. What bothered me most was a drawing taped to the door from the inside. It was extremely messy, a sketch of odd lines in a brown-colored pencil that was frustratingly indiscernible. I could see the outline of something, a vague shape, but I could never make out what it was intended to be. I never had the nerve to stop and stare long enough to really investigate, but each time I walked by, I'd steal a glance. A year before the incident I'm about to describe, I was walking with my mom past the camper. We had just gone to the park nearby and, unfortunately, had to pass the camper before we could cross the street and continue walking. I didn't want to seem afraid, so I kept on walking right behind her and didn't object when she walked past it. This time, I felt a little braver. I was frustrated about not being able to decipher the drawing for so long. While my mom was a few feet away, I stopped in front of the camper door and took a moment to really look at the drawing. Upon closer inspection, the paper was filthy. I remember doing a project in elementary school where we soaked printer paper in black coffee to make it look aged, and that's what it reminded me of. My mom walked on without noticing I'd stopped, but my eyes stayed fixed on the indistinct mass of dirt-caked scribbles until I could make out what looked to be a tiny, malformed face. My stomach turned. I immediately felt cold and disgusted as my eyes trailed over the rest of the image. I didn't know what kind of creature it was at the time, but now I can look back and say the drawing was of a badly deformed fetus inside a mass of large, perfect circles, like those made by a circular ring ruler. Its face was contorted as if in pain. It was so graphically disturbing and seemed to portray this odd sense of suffering that stuck with me for days. As a child, I didn't know how to process it, and the mental image still makes me sick to think about. I'd never seen anything like it before. Adrenaline flooded my body, and my chest hurt with fear, but I selfishly thought of my glorious little trips for ring pops and said absolutely nothing as I followed behind my mom. This was, in retrospect, a classically terrible idea. It's one of those things you scream at main characters in movies for. Ever since my ill feelings about the camper had been elevated by the drawing on the door, I thought about it every time we drove by. About a month later, my mom once again graced us with several bucks and permission to walk down to Rotten Robbie and grab our respective snacks. I thought about telling my sister about what I'd seen on the way there, but she was older and braver, and I was terrified she'd make me cross the street with her to check it out. It was a bright, sunny day, and I told myself with false certainty that nothing was going to happen. If I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it'd go away. We walked past the camper, and it was thankfully uneventful. On the walk back, I felt more comfortable and was focused on fighting open my candy wrapper while my sister walked alongside me. We passed the camper a second time, but I didn't give it half as much thought as the first time. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I recall being interrupted mid-sentence as my sister softly yet firmly said my name. There was a distinct fear in her voice that immediately set me on edge, like a bucket of ice water. All my senses heightened, and I became aware of everything, including the sound of haphazard footsteps about 10 feet behind us. It was accompanied by a heavy rustling sound, like a heavy backpack, and nervously, I half turned my head to look. A man with a long, unkempt beard and wearing many layers of ragged clothing stood behind us, his eyes unmistakably burning into our backs as he walked. His movements weren't normal. It was a drunken shuffle, like each of his feet was unimaginably heavy and needed to be moved with one grand effort at a time. His shoulders were skewed, his head tilted downward with a strange arch in his neck. I could hear his shoes scraping the gravel with every step, but rather than seeming genuinely intoxicated, it was as if he was intentionally meandering in our direction, like a zombie, with the deliberate effort to frighten us. Behind him, I saw the camper door was wide open for the first time in all the years we'd spent living there and realized this was the man who had been living inside. "He's following us," I choked out, my eyes filling with tears. My mind was spinning as I stared straight ahead again, the wide street and sidewalks abnormally empty all around. My sister grabbed my hand. She squeezed it hard enough to hurt without looking my way, speaking carefully under her breath. "On the count of 3, we race home," she told me in a very serious tone. I couldn't reply through the growing lump in my throat, but every single cell in my body understood we had to put some distance between us and this man as quickly as possible. She began to count steadily while we walked faster, and the most terrifying part was that he started running before we even had a chance to. He must have heard her directions to me and tried to get a head start by sprinting in our direction before she got to 3, but his footsteps were noisy, and we bolted like deer the instant we heard him behind us. I'll never forget it. The chase felt exactly like you imagine in your nightmares, the fear that your pursuer is inches away from grabbing your arm or a fistful of your hair. I pictured myself being dragged into the van with nobody around to see or hear me. We ran so fast we didn't even have the breath to scream, and peering back behind me about 10 seconds later, I saw him running in our direction with absolutely none of the impairment he showed with those zombie-like steps moments before. I think back on it now, and he may have been deliberately pretending to be handicapped to lower our guards so we wouldn't start running. The thought is terrifying, but I can't rationalize it any other way. We made it to our grandparents' house and, without looking behind us, yanked open the stubborn old door before slamming it closed and scrambling past their excited dogs to get as deep into the house as possible. I don't even think we locked it, as our main goal was getting within the line of sight of any adults as quickly as possible. My mom was talking to my grandpa at the table and gave us an amused look when we bounded into the living room. Since we were kids, running around wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and she didn't ask what happened as we collapsed on the couch and tried to catch our breath. The inside of the house felt so safe and full of good spirits that I didn't even want to bring up what had just happened. Like waking up from a nightmare you didn't want to talk about, I was desperate to go back to normalcy. I wanted to forget it entirely, to unwrap my candy and act like everything was completely normal for the sake of my own sanity, and that's exactly what I did. I asked my sister a few years back if she remembered this incident. I'm 25 and she's 28 now, and her response was strange. She remembered immediately without the need for me to provide details, but she quickly waved it off and insisted he had to have been a bored homeless man looking to spook some kids walking home with no real intent to harm anyone. I don't know. I'd like to believe it's some innocent misunderstanding, but like they always say about gut feelings, they're rarely wrong. I feel in my soul that he wanted to hurt me and my sister that day. I never told her or anyone else about the strange drawing on the door, and I'm not sure if my sister saw the open door and connected him to the camper or not. It's one of my biggest regrets, as I would hate for any other children to have been less fortunate after innocently walking past the camper in the shade. I believe he may have chosen the spot between the park and gas station deliberately due to the number of children walking around the area. I never saw the camper again a day or so after this. I'm not proud of how I handled this and would encourage anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation to contact authorities immediately for the safety of others around. I don't know if maybe this whole story comes off as melodramatic, but it was very real and very frightening in a way I can't forget. This happened this Saturday, 2 days ago. I'm a 19-year-old freshman at university who moved from a fairly small town to a big city. There was a guy I talked to over Tinder for around 2 weeks. He was cute and seemed nice. We had a lot in common. He even studied at the same university. He was older, though. He already had a degree and was now doing post-grad. The first time we ever met, we went out to grab a coffee on Monday, exactly a week ago. I had a great time, and when he asked me if I'd like to get drinks, the drinking age here is 18, on Saturday, I happily said yes. We met up at a local bar and talked without a moment of awkwardness for 2 hours. We really clicked. I had to go to the bathroom, and when I came back, a man was waiting for me outside the toilet. He stopped me and told me the guy sitting at my table put something in my drink and asked if I wanted him to call the police. I thanked him but said no, everything was fine, and went back to my table. I really liked the guy and wanted to believe that the random man was just pranking me. Still, I wasn't willing to risk it, so I told him directly what happened. I said, "I'm sorry, this sounds insane, but after I got out of the bathroom, some random guy told me you put something in my drink." He laughed and said that's insane, as if we were giggling at the situation together. He wasn't serious about it at all. I apologized and said I didn't think he did that, not at all, but I'd be much more at peace if he chugged my drink just so I know the random guy was pranking me, because nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I apologized again and said the drinks were on me, and I was very sorry to make the situation awkward. He said that's absolutely not a problem, but he just had to go pee first. I waited. After 15 minutes, I realized he wasn't coming back. I waited around a little longer, and after half an hour, I paid and went home. Upon getting home, I checked my Tinder and saw he deleted his account. Okay, maybe he thought I was so insane that our date made him delete the app. Still, it bothered me. I googled him and found nothing. Today, I went to the records office at my university and asked if a person with his name was studying here. The lady working there told me that's private information she couldn't share. I then asked if a person with his name had ever obtained a degree from this university. She looked it up and told me that no one with his name had ever obtained a degree here. He lied to me. He told me he did his undergraduate degree at my university. He hadn't. Or, alternatively, he gave me a fake name. I'm now sure that he had terrible intentions and did spike my drink. I was more than lucky that someone noticed. I have no idea what he'd do to me had I drunk that, and I don't really want to know. I'm still a bit creeped out about this situation. I did delete Tinder, and I'm very glad I didn't give him my phone number or my address. He did offer to pick me up, and I cleverly said no, yet dumbly told him that the coffee place we met up at was walking distance to my apartment. So he knows the area I live in, as well as my first and last name and where I study. I don't think there's anything I can do about it, though. I seriously doubt he even gave me his real name. To the random Tinder guy who lied to me and probably tried to spike my drink, let's not meet. And to the kind man who made me aware of the situation, thank you very much. This happened 2 nights ago, so I'm still replaying it over and over in my head. I thought this would be a good place to share. I'm a pretty predictable person with a predictable schedule, so I'm not sure if this was a random occurrence or if someone knew my nightly routine. I'm a 35-year-old woman. My husband, Rob, gets up for work hours before me, so he goes to bed before I do. I usually get to bed a few hours after he does, around the same time every night. I turn off the lights and TV in the living room and take my dog to the back door to let her out. She's tiny, old, and poses zero threat to anyone. The door leads to a large deck outside. Off to the right of the deck are a few steps down and a small path to the gate, which we always keep chained and locked. Every single night, before opening the door, I peek out of the window right next to it without disturbing the blinds and flip on the deck light. I never expect anyone to be there, and we've never had a problem with anyone trespassing or trying to break in. It's just something I do every night. Kind of like peeking behind the shower curtain before I pee. I know no one is back there, but if I don't check, then that's going to be the one time that there actually is someone hiding there, you know? Hey, I watch a ton of horror movies, and it's pitch black outside at night where I live. So, a few nights ago, I got ready for bed, went to the back door with my dog slowly following behind me, and peeked out the window. I flipped on the light. My heart jumped into my throat when I saw a skinny, dirty guy in his 30s or 40s standing off to the side of the door, facing it. I saw him raise his arm and hold a screwdriver above his head as soon as the light went on, preparing for someone to open the door. I screamed, "Rob, get up! Get the gun," as loud as I could, which startled the guy. He jumped over the rail of the deck, even though he was right next to the stairs, and ran. My husband ran out of our bedroom with his gun. He called the police, and they showed up within 5 minutes. They drove around trying to find the guy, but no luck. The guy broke the lock on our gate to get in. He also pried open the back screen door, which we always keep locked as well. If I had opened the door without looking out first, I might be dead. I don't know if I caught the guy trying to break in or if he was waiting for me to open the door like I do every night. Either way, it was absolutely terrifying. My parents are buying us outdoor security cameras this week as an early birthday present for Rob. This happened a few months ago in the McDonald's at Copenhagen station. I am not Danish, only visiting the country for 1 day, and since I wanted to travel cheap, I decided to take the cheapest bus there, which just so happened to be the one arriving at 11 p.m. the day before. I thought I could save even more money by not renting a bed somewhere and instead spending the night awake or half asleep at the station, doing my business the next day, and sleeping long and well on the bus back home. So, this McDonald's is open 24/7. I pretty early discovered that the station was too cold for me to get some shut-eye, so I went inside, bought a coffee, and sat down at an empty table. Plenty of lighting and semi-drunk people to keep me awake, I thought. I should add that I'm 23 and female. After a while of sitting in my spot, a strange guy walked over and placed a full cup of soda on my table. He said in Danish something I believe meant, "I ate my food already. I didn't drink any. You should have it instead." I am Swedish, and although some Swedes understand Danish perfectly well, I have some difficulties doing so this is just a guess. Anyway, I didn't really pay much attention to the cup after it was put on my table. I just wrote it off as a random drunk trying to flirt. But I noticed that in front of me, a table away, sat another guy, and he was watching me closely because we did lock eyes at times. I looked up to peek at him. This creeped me out. I really didn't like being watched like this, and he just sat there for nearly an hour, even though he had no food in front of him. In the end, this dude stood up and walked over to me, and I cursed internally, thinking I'd have to defend myself and tell him to leave. But he turned, and there stood the guy who had left the soda cup on my table. He told the soda guy to leave after pushing the soda cup back into his arms and that he didn't want to see him anywhere near this place again. Then he turned to me and explained, in English, that the soda guy had walked by my table several times, glancing at me and the cup, probably waiting for me to drink it. He said he'd finished his meal a while ago and just stayed to watch over me but had to leave and reminded me to be careful. I hadn't even noticed the soda guy supposedly pacing by. I was too fixated on this other dude who just happened to be the good guy watching over me. Who knows what was in that soda? And what would have happened if I had gotten really thirsty and drunk some of it? This happened about 2 years ago when I was 20. A little backstory. I'm quite a small female. I was doing some shopping in town, alone. I still remember that it was a warm Sunday afternoon and people were out with their families. It was quite busy in the city center. I had some free time, so I decided to pay my grandma a visit. To get to her place, you needed to take a 20-minute bus ride from where I was. So, to the story, I was waiting for my bus when I noticed this man staring at me. He wasn't much older than I was, and I still remember he was wearing a bright yellow hat. I usually don't really care when someone looks at me, but this man was staring at me with a sort of anger, as if I had done something to him. Most people at the bus stop were either facing the traffic or looking at the coming buses, but not him. He had his back to the traffic and was just staring at me. I had a weird feeling about him, but I saw my bus coming and just hoped he wouldn't get on it. Except he did. I quickly sat in a window seat, and luckily for me, this old lady sat next to me. She acted like a shield between me and this guy. He stood next to our seat for almost the entire ride, except for pacing around oddly a couple of times. I was already quite freaked out and was texting my boyfriend at the time throughout it. While he hadn't actually done anything to me, I just had a really bad gut feeling. A few stops before mine, the old lady sadly got off the bus. The guy's behavior became even weirder. He sat next to me, which made me completely tense up. I refused to even look at my phone or text anyone in case he saw anything he could use to look me up later. I think he sensed me tensing up, so he got up and either stood next to my seat or paced around the bus. My stop came, and I waited until the last moment to get off the bus. Sadly, he also managed to get off the bus. What followed confirmed that he was indeed after me. I guess in an attempt to put me off again, he ran ahead of me on the road and kept glancing back. Him doing so actually gave me the only out from this situation. You see, if he had kept walking behind me, I would have been forced to either A, make a run for the apartment door and hope I was fast enough to close it before him, or B, run in another direction and just hope I would have reached someplace safe before him. I was out of the city center now, and there weren't many people around to help me. So, in that split moment, I decided to turn around, walk in the other direction, and dial my mom. It's pretty bad, but I decided to call her in case anything happened to me, so she would know who it was. I told my mom what happened, and she told me to make a run for it. Down the road, there was a small burger place that had a security guard. She told me to run for it and just tell them what was going on. So, I did. I glanced back and saw the guy running after me, which almost made me cry. Luckily, I reached the burger place before he caught me. From the window, I saw him crossing the road. I guess him seeing me get into the burger place threw him off. I have no idea why he fixated on me or what his plans were if he had caught me. I'm not sure I even want to know. This all happened in August 2017. I was 23 and had just moved back into my mom's place, which happened to be about 30 minutes from my nearest friend's place. My car broke down, so I was Ubering everywhere I had to go. I went down to my friend's place to help them move. I went to Target to grab some champagne and orange juice because I apparently hated myself and thought an imminent hangover was a great idea. Fast forward to that night, and of course, I'm doubled over throwing up with a migraine, barely able to lift my head, and I have to work the next day's morning shift. My friends have no idea if they have any over-the-counter meds for headaches, but of course, the person who used substances in the house offers me an edible. Now, I may have killed the bottle of champagne, but I haven't touched marijuana in years. I ate half of that edible and waited about 45 minutes to feel better, then called my Uber. I was getting picked up in an apartment complex and, of course, had to walk to the front to find the driver because I've never met an Uber driver who can locate an address with accuracy. I get in the back seat, and he turns around to introduce himself. This guy has a southern drawl that would make molasses seem like water. It was at this moment I realized I made a mistake. I told him I had a migraine and just wanted to go home. He pulls out a bottle of water that was already opened and some random pills, telling me these should make me feel much better. So, of course, I politely grab them, then proceed to stuff them into the seat and shove the water bottle in the pocket in front of me. We begin our 30-minute journey to my mom's apartment. If it weren't for the substance coming along for the ride, I probably would have hopped out right then. This guy starts off the drive by telling me prison stories, then somehow it delves into how the world is going to end by December 20-something of 2017. Every few sentences, he's now bringing up his bunker. He asked me constantly if I just wanted to head there instead of home. My high self kept telling him I'd love to, but I have work, so I can't. Maybe next time, I guess? He's cycling through conspiracies from the earth being flat to Kandahar, Afghanistan giants. He says, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but look up Kandahar, Afghanistan on YouTube. Also, in case you all didn't know this, the world ain't heliocentric. Just get a pair of binoculars, you'll see. At some point, he's telling me that he has an arsenal of guns. He asks me if I have guns, and my liberal millennial self tells him I have lots of guns. He grows opium at his bunker, and again asks me to come with him. I'm panicked. Texting everyone I know, sharing my location, and started recording. I managed to get about 7 minutes in total of this 30-minute drive on film. So we're getting closer and closer to the exit he needs to take to drop me off. He's still in the far left lane of this 4-lane highway. I kept telling him to move over, and the exit is coming up, and this creepy individual keeps telling me how well stocked his bunker is. He misses my exit. Finally, I lose it and start screaming at him to get me home, that my mom is waiting for me, and I have work tomorrow, like my job means anything to this person or even to me. He finally does get off the exit after I started kicking his seat, threatening to jump out of the moving car. I ran out of his car so fast when he hit the red light outside of the apartment complex. As soon as I got inside, I tried telling my mom what happened, but she brushed it off and was more disappointed that I told her I had taken an edible. The next morning, I coherently explained what actually happened and showed her the videos, and we reported him to Uber. I still take Ubers on occasion, but I will never use one while alone and inebriated again. And this is the reason I don't consume THC. The universe knows when I'm high, and things like this happen to me. I've got scissors and you've got a knife. I was just home for Christmas and was reminded by my father of a story he told me once before. My father moved to Manhattan from Peru in 1970. One night during this time period, he was out at a bar with his friend Carlos, also from Peru. Sometime during the night, they were approached by a well-spoken, friendly, nicely dressed American man. He offered to buy them a round of drinks, and they spent a few hours drinking and talking. After a while, the man invited them back to his apartment, somewhere on the Upper East Side, to keep drinking and hanging out. My father instantly and instinctively was not into this idea, but Carlos, drunk and chasing more free drinks, stupidly insisted they take him up on it. They arrived at the apartment, and after an hour or so, Carlos had passed out sitting up in the man's reclining chair. Everything had been fine, but my dad was never comfortable with the idea and now knew it'd be even more complicated with Carlos passed out. He went to the bathroom for a minute to splash some water on his face and sober up himself. When he stepped inside, he immediately noticed a large pair of scissors sitting on the sink. They were much larger than any normal household pair, and he compared them to something you'd see in a hospital. He told me at this moment his entire body was overtaken with instinct, and something inside him made him pick up the scissors and put them in the waist of his pants behind his back. When he walked back out to the living room, he found the man with his hand on Carlos's leg. He asked him what he was doing and said they were leaving right now. The man told him to just relax and keep drinking, but enough was enough, and my father was insistent. At this point, he said the man's face dropped, his voice lowered, and his whole demeanor changed. "You're not going anywhere," was the man's reply as he produced a large knife from a pocket of his own. Upon this, my father pulled the scissors from behind his back and locked eyes with the man. They stood tensely for a moment as my father explained in so many words, "I've got scissors, and you've got a knife. If you come for me, I'm getting you too." The man, realizing the stalemate, put the knife down and said, "Get the freak out." My dad shook Carlos awake, practically carrying him to his feet, and pushed him out the door, never taking his eyes off the man or his hands off the scissors. He said the man stood in the door and glared at them as they backed down the hallway to the elevator. Could have gotten a degree in criminology at this rate. At the time of this story, I was 21 and living in a major Midwestern city, attending the university there. Having lived there for only 1 month before my story began, I had witnessed a train stop stabbing, been yelled at by a person under the influence of substances, had a homeless guy follow me and threaten to choke me outside the physics building on campus, and watched a 13-car police raid on a substance house just across the street. The area around the university is known for being rough and has a notoriously high crime rate. We would get a few texts a week from the campus police saying things like there had been a robbery, a break-in, an assault, stalking, attempted kidnappings, etc. I always ignored these texts, thinking foolishly that I would never be a victim because I was smart enough to stay out of trouble, not go out alone late at night, all the cliches. I seriously regret this behavior now, and to anyone listening to this, please never think that you're 100% safe, no matter your level of preparedness. Always do your best to stay observant and careful. The first incident wasn't too unusual. I was just a block or two from my apartment building one day in the early evening. It was still light outside. I was walking my dog, Sesame, a cute Shiba Inu who just looks like a fluffy, goofy puppy and has never been frightening or particularly protective in his life. As I was heading back home, I passed a small parking lot and a large van. I could see a man in his early 60s sitting in the driver's seat, smoking a cigarette. He was staring at me. As I passed, He actually leaned out of his car and called out to me, "Hey, you there, that's a cute dog. What's his name?" I should mention this isn't even my first story like this. I have a pretty intense fear of strangers and actually struggle with PTSD from other incidents in my life. Being pretty wary for this reason, I ignored him and just walked faster. I heard a car door shut behind me and turned quickly to see that he had gotten out of his van and was slowly walking toward me. He called out to me again, "Hey, baby, I just want to see your dog. Come back." His phrasing annoyed me, and I gripped my dog's leash and started to speed walk away from him, starting to feel nervous. My heart was beginning to pound, but I kept telling myself over and over that I was overreacting and it was just my paranoia acting up, and there was nothing to worry about. Boy, was I wrong. I managed to turn the corner and was about to cross the final park before getting to my apartment. In my fear over the van guy, I wasn't paying attention as much as I usually do to what was in front of me. I looked back over my shoulder, and the guy had stopped following me. He was, however, standing in the middle of the sidewalk with a huge, creepy grin on his face. I whirled back around, my eyes glued to my building. I only needed to walk another half a block, and I'd be home. I was going to get away from him and his creepy van. Just when I thought I was safe, a group of 5 or 6 men came from the side of the park I wasn't watching. They were all tall and intimidating in stature, and all of them were laughing and looking right at me. Out of the corner of my eye, the van guy had started walking toward me as well. I remember he was whistling. I again picked up my pace and desperately searched for my keys in my pocket as I hurried to the door. The group of men then veered toward me, partially cutting me off, and in all my stupid politeness, I stopped. They grinned at me with sick, perverted smiles, obviously checking me out, looking up and down my body. It made me sick. I tried not to panic and inched closer to my apartment. "Hey, what's your name? Where are you going? What's your Snapchat? Is that your apartment? Can we come over? Do you smoke?" They all barraged me with questions one after another. I tried to refuse them, stammering, "No thank you," as I saw the van guy come and join their group, leering at me. While I inched away, they inched closer. One of them then reached out for me, his fingers actually touching my arm. I leapt back, trying not to start crying, but Sesame suddenly lunged at them, his teeth bared, a horrifying snarl ripping from his throat. Every bit of cute Sheba personality was gone, and he looked like he wanted to tear one of these guys' throats out. It startled them enough that I was able to turn and sprint the final distance to my building, locking the door behind me. I fell to the floor inside my building, hugging Sesame. However, the entire front of my building was glass, and to my horror and disbelief, the group of men came and stood in front of the windows, grinning at me, laughing, and making kissy faces and lewd gestures at me. The apartment manager came out and called the cops on them, but they ran away. I made it back home and scrubbed myself in the shower, crying and shaking with fear. Sesame got a special dinner that evening, and I kept telling myself that they just wanted to mess with me, and I was never in any real danger. Stupid of me, I know now. About a month later, when I had finally managed to walk outside my apartment without severe anxiety, I was actually planning on moving a bit farther away from campus. It was still going to be in a sketchy neighborhood, but the thought of those men knowing where I lived kept me up at night. My apartment actually hired a security guard to be there 24/7 after someone had broken into the building, smashed all the windows, destroyed some of the furniture, and stolen a bunch of bikes. Of course, my bike got stolen. Anyways, I was heading home from class, and it was a beautiful day. I actually felt pretty happy for once and popped my earbuds in on the last few blocks before I got home. Stupid, I know. After a block or so, I started to feel like someone was watching me. My palms started sweating. I glanced behind me, trying not to look obvious, and a tall man was about 20 feet behind me, staring straight at me. I snapped my head back around and ripped out my earbuds. No, 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 I thought, it can't be one of them. I was probably just jumping to conclusions, given my anxiety disorder and paranoia, but there was something familiar about him. My heart started racing as I hoped to God the others weren't waiting for me around the corner of my building, ready to jump me. I walked faster, wishing Sesame was with me. I was too afraid to look back at him as I fumbled with my keys and wrenched the door open as hard as I could. This turned out to be a crucial mistake. As I ran to the elevator, trying to breathe a sigh of relief, I saw with absolute horror that the man had caught the door I had thrown wide open and was slowly coming into the building with me. He paused, standing away from me, but close enough that I could hear his ragged breathing and smell alcohol coming off him. My heart was thudding in my chest now, and I struggled to think clearly. The apartment manager was already home for the day, and I was completely alone in the lobby. There were no other doors out of that room, and the stranger was blocking my way to the door. The security guard, who was supposed to be keeping an eye on the building, was nowhere to be seen. The elevator came, and I tried to run into it and slam my hand over the door close button as fast as I could. I pushed my floor button and huddled in the far corner of the elevator. I started to once again try to catch my breath, but right when the door was almost closed, he stuck his hand in. I couldn't believe it. He waited until the door was just about to close, and then he stopped it. He was standing close enough that there was no way that was a mistake. My stomach dropped, and a suffocating sense of dread crept in. I kept my head down as he joined me. My desperate hope that he was just a dirty, drunk resident of the building was dashed when he didn't press any buttons. I don't know why I didn't run out of the elevator or try to leave the building again. I was paralyzed with fear, and all I could do was watch as the door closed and sealed my fate. The elevator was filled with the stench of alcohol and BO. If I wasn't so terrified, I may have gagged. It was nauseating. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't move. I tried to scream at myself in my head to press the wrong button and try to escape him, but I was completely petrified. He leaned closer to me, and I heard him breathe in deeply, then very quietly sigh, like he was content. I felt tears well in my eyes, and the seconds it took to reach the top floor where I lived felt like hours. I saw no way I could escape the sick, drunk guy who was smelling me. In the reflection of the elevator walls, I could make out his disgusting smile. He was staring directly at me, his hands in his pockets, clearly holding onto something. I'm not religious, but I prayed that I would make it to my door in time. I realized he probably wasn't going to attack me in the elevator. There was a large camera in the ceiling. I looked up at it, feeling a tear spill out of my eye as I did so, hoping that whoever saw the tape eventually would identify this man. The worst part of all of this is that I've trained in martial arts and self-defense since I was about 8 years old. I thought of myself as stronger and braver than I was acting. I should know what to do. I should be strong enough to do it. But no matter how many times I had disarmed, thrown, or choked out attackers in the studio, nothing totally prepares you for the dread of a real-life situation. As the elevator reached my floor, I managed to snap out of my stupor long enough to dash through the door and run to my apartment unit. I nearly missed the keyhole, but I threw open the door. I was almost through when my backpack snagged on the outside handle, trapping me. I heard the man walking quickly to my door, a low chuckle building in his throat as he watched me panic and struggle to get free. I felt like a mouse being watched by a cat, trapped and helpless, so close to escaping. I finally gave up and shoved my arms through the straps, abandoning my backpack. As I did so, the man suddenly reached out for me. I was able to slam the door shut, deadbolting it. The gust of air from the door slamming brought his disgusting smell in with me, and in my terror and disgust, I retched violently. I looked through the peephole. He was staring right at me, pressing his forehead against the door, his mouth bent in a furious scowl. He swore at me and ripped my backpack off the handle, slamming it to the ground. I winced as I heard my laptop thud. I was still too terrified to say anything, but I grabbed the knife I kept by my door, ready if he tried anything. After a few minutes of staring at my door, jiggling the handle, licking the peephole, and making obscene motions at it, he unzipped my backpack, dumping its contents on the floor. He picked up my bag, sniffing it and leering at the peephole as he did so, like he knew I was watching him. I couldn't look away, again paralyzed in fear. Finally, he left, using the elevator visible from my door like nothing had happened. I continued to stare out the peephole for what felt like an eternity, then finally called the apartment manager, feeling my anger rising that the security guard hadn't been anywhere in sight, not paying attention. It turns out he had fallen asleep eating Taco Bell and watching movies on his phone. He was only 10 feet away from the elevator the entire time, sleeping in the office behind a closed door. They fired him, but the creepy guy was never caught, and neither were any of the others. I don't even know for sure if this man was part of the original group. I was honestly too terrified to look much at their faces during the first incident. I moved out of my apartment a week later, staying with my boyfriend at the time for the remainder of my lease, and keeping Sesame with me at all times when possible. A few more things happened while I lived in that city, from having to call in a gunfight from outside my new apartment window to having to pick up my friend who was being followed by a van, to having to evacuate during an arson incident. There are nice things about that city too, but during my time there, besides learning the police department was absolutely useless and corrupt, and nearly escaping with my life multiple times, I couldn't be happier to be far, far away from there and doing a lot better with my fear and anxiety. About 5 years ago, I, male 26, set out to travel the world. Being straight out of college had left me in debt, desperate for any job I was overqualified for, and generally depressed. I felt isolated and alone in my small town in Washington, and found the only way to get out, travel. My high school buddy suggested I look into woofing and volunteering as a way to travel cheaply, so I did. The way it works is quite simple. You work for around 25 hours a week on a farm in exchange for food and housing. The draw is that, since the community of budget travelers is quite large, it's a great way to meet new people, step outside your comfort zone, and just let yourself live and figure life out. Fast forward 8 months, and I am a seasoned cow manure shoveler. I started out in Washington, Oregon, and went south to California. There, I was able to save some money by being paid under the table for some extra work, and I was now faced with a decision where to go in the world. The excitement of being able to purchase a ticket to almost anywhere in the world got the best of me, and on the advice of my well-meaning hippie volunteering partner, I chose at random. I went to a randomizer website and clicked the country button, Georgia. The country of Georgia. To say I didn't know anything about it was an understatement. But the fear of the unknown made it exciting and exotic somehow, so I did it. I purchased a ticket and started browsing for a farm that could host me. There were few options, and most were remote and didn't even have an internet connection. I messaged every single one, because few ever respond, and got a response from one farm on top of a mountain. The pictures showed a traditional Georgian stone house with a large garden in the back, a family with several cheerful children, grandparents having dinner, animals. It seemed warm and inviting. The description was written in good English, and the requirements for work seemed reasonable. I was excited. After I flew into Tbilisi, the capital, I followed the directions they had sent to locate the farm, which wasn't an easy task. Few in Georgia speak English. The roads are in poor condition since few have been maintained since the fall of the Soviet Union, and the country is generally poor. It took me around 20 hours of Soviet buses and taxis, winding roads, and paths to get to that desired blue pin on my map. It was a dirt path leading up a steep hill into a national park in the north of the country. There was nothing for miles but trees and their silence. As I got up that hill, I saw the house about half a mile away on an even steeper hill, surrounded by the trees. From that viewpoint, it seemed abandoned, overgrown, brown, and dreary. As I walked past the gate, Geary, fake name, the apparent owner, approached me. He was a heavy, small middle-aged guy with a big smile on his face. He shook my hand and, in broken English, started to show me around. He also smelled of alcohol. As he was showing me around, I noticed that there wasn't anyone else there but us. I asked about his wife and kids, and he brushed that aside, saying something like, "They're away right now." By this point, I was creeped out. From browsing around, it was clear that the farm was in deep decline. Apple trees and crops were dying. The roof of the small barn had caved in. The house itself was full of trash and smelled of mold. It was obvious that Geary was going through a rough patch. But I wasn't going to turn around and just leave in the middle of nowhere without a plan, having not slept for the past 36 hours. It was evening, and after feeding me well and trying as best as he could to hold a conversation in English, Geary showed me my room on the second floor, and I went to sleep. I almost immediately blacked out from the exhaustion and stress and would have slept for 10 hours if I hadn't been awoken by a strange noise in the middle of the night. It sounded like something metallic and heavy was being dragged across the wooden floor. In that sleepy in-between state, I listened to it for a few minutes, thought nothing of it, and went back to sleep once it stopped. In the morning, Geary, now sober and grumpy, asked me to repair some of the windows and doors in the house, as he himself planned to go and fetch some components in a nearby village. Again, I got this weird feeling creeping down my spine. Something wasn't right. He didn't maintain eye contact and was evasive. There was no cell reception, no internet. Once he left, I checked around the house to get a general idea of the place, and it became apparent that the house was hardly ever lived in. Like one of those abandoned houses, there was broken furniture, newspapers, and old photos on the floor, a shattered mirror. I took my phone and looked through the saved listing again. The photos didn't match either the backyard, the garden, or the walls. Geary wasn't in any of them. It was a completely different house. Now, by this point, I was full-blown panicking. I packed my stuff and started to leave when I saw a group of 3 men going up that first hill. There weren't any other paths I could take, so I went behind the house and rushed down this hill into the forest. After some time, I stopped and listened. I heard them in the house. They were clearly looking for me. Afraid of making any noise, I remained still, hidden behind a bush. I don't know how long I waited, but they were persistent. At some point, I heard them leave, so I counted to some large number and proceeded back into the house and onto the path. Once I found it was all clear, I booked the hell out of there. I'd never run this fast. But I was still in the middle of nowhere, no traffic, no public transport. I reached a paved road and started walking in the general direction from where I remembered coming. Hours went by, and finally, a car drove by and stopped. Now, in a horror movie, this would have been Geary and his friends, but this was actually a really nice Russian family that gave me a ride to town. The listing disappeared from the website a few days after I left, and I haven't heard from Geary since. I've yet to make sense of that experience. I have traveled since and volunteered too. Some people, once they hear this story, laugh and say that the guy was coming over with a couple of friends from the village to have a chat over a few beers, while others say he was bound to kidnap and harm me. But I trust my gut feeling, something was really not right. This happened during the summer of 2015. I had just graduated high school and still lived in my hometown. I was out with some friends, and it was getting really late, around 1 a.m., so I decided to head home. I stopped by a substance store close to my house that was open 24/7 to pick up some aspirin and snacks. The store was in the same parking lot as a supermarket, important detail. I parked my car close to the store. The lot was nearly empty. There were no more than 2 other cars in this giant parking lot, and I was nowhere near them. I went inside and quickly grabbed what I needed because I had this overwhelming feeling of dread the whole time. It felt like someone was watching me, but I couldn't see anyone else there besides the cashier. After getting everything I intended to buy, I stalled at the checkout and wandered aisle by aisle, looking at random things, hoping whoever might be outside would leave if I took too long. The whole time, I thought I was just being paranoid since I wasn't used to going out late, strict parents growing up. After about 20 minutes, I paid and left the store. As I got to the door, I literally bolted to my car, pepper spray in hand, and locked myself in. I turned my head to check the back seat. Just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief because no one was there, someone tapped on my window. Before leaving the store, I had looked around near the entrance and saw no one near my car, so how did I not notice someone there? That's when I really started to freak out. I don't know if this person was Ted Bundy inspired or what, but the situation was unsettling. He was a very handsome blonde man with slightly long hair and a cast on his arm. My first instinct was to drive off, but he was leaning on the front hood of my car. I didn't want to hurt him, so I rolled my window down just an inch so he could speak, hoping he'd back up a bit so I could drive away without hitting him. But no, he stayed glued to my car. He asked if I could help him with directions and look up an address for him. I said, I really need to go, sir. Maybe ask inside the substance store, they can help. He replied, I already went to the supermarket, and they couldn't help. That place had closed at 8 p.m., so there was no way he had just been lurking around for 5 hours waiting for someone's help. He went on about feeling really tired and asked if I could give him water or some food I had bought, claiming he had no money. I told him, okay, and began reaching for the chips on the passenger seat. As I started to roll the window down slightly, like I expected, he moved closer to my window. However, now that he was off my car, I hit the gas. He chased after me, and I heard a scraping sound on the side of my car as I pulled away. I didn't drive directly home in case I was being followed. I drove down the highway for an hour because I was so distraught over what had just happened. When I finally got home, I found the entire side of my car had been scraped from the door to the trunk. I'm pretty sure he used a knife or some sharp object because the scratches were deep and rough. I reported the incident, but they never found him or any similar cases in my town. He must have been watching me the whole time, maybe from the store windows. How else would he have known I bought food? I also think he hid behind my car so I couldn't see him when I came out. I believe he was trying to get me before I got into my car, but I moved too fast. Guy aggressively tried to walk me home. About 6 years ago, I was 21 and home from college for the summer, living with my parents. This was deep Texas suburbia, where all the houses were cookie-cutter homes built around the same time by the same developer. Every few blocks, there was a pool or a park of some sort. Every year, the community, I'm not sure who organizes it, held a Rock the Park event at one of the local parks within walking distance of my house. Some older guys brought their garage band and covered songs by Aerosmith, the Eagles, and others. The pool stayed open late, and you could hear the music from every corner of the park. It wasn't too loud unless you were close to the stage. That evening, my parents went out on a dinner date. With my 21-year-old logic, I decided to pour some vodka into a Coca-Cola bottle and walk up to the park for some tunes and a good time. The park was only about a block away, so I got there quickly and finished most of my drink on the way. Feeling pretty good, I headed to a bench near the stage, just a marked-off area with cones and speakers on the grass. There was a man sitting on the far edge of the bench, but I didn't pay him much attention at first. There was about 4 feet of space between us. Before long, however, he struck up a conversation. The man, who had a bony face and looked at least 30, greeted me politely. I responded but quickly pulled out my phone, hoping he'd take the hint that I wasn't interested in talking. He asked if I was having a good time. Feeling a bit tipsy, I told him I was. I even mentioned I had vodka in my Coke, shaking the bottle to show the little left in it. That's when he started inching closer, becoming more conversational. He asked if I lived nearby, and I casually said yes, adding that I'd walked there. At the time, I thought he was asking because he assumed I couldn't drive due to the substances I consumed. He then mentioned a vague location where he supposedly lived and asked for my number. At this point, I started to feel uncomfortable. It dawned on me that I was alone, tipsy, and potentially vulnerable. When I politely declined to share my number, he said, "Okay, well, get to know me then." To create some distance, I said the music was too loud and pretended I needed to make a phone call. I moved to the other side of the playground equipment, ensuring he couldn't see me directly. I texted several college friends, explaining the situation and asking for advice. They told me to leave, but I didn't want him to follow me. I then reached out to high school friends, hoping someone was home for the summer. Fortunately, one friend was available, though she couldn't arrive for another 20 to 30 minutes. I decided to sit on the swings, where I could see the stage but hoped he'd lose interest. Instead, he approached and sat on the swing next to me, asking, "What do you want to know about me?" "What do you need to know?" I replied, "Actually, I'm getting tired. I'll probably head home soon. I just want to enjoy the music a bit longer without talking." That's when he became adamant about walking me home. It started as a suggestion, but as I repeatedly declined, he grew more insistent. My parents wouldn't be home for hours, so I couldn't risk him knowing where I lived. To mislead him, I pointed in the opposite direction of my house. He walked a few steps in that direction, then turned back, expecting me to follow. Over the next 10 minutes, he stayed near me, making it clear he intended to walk me home. Thankfully, my friend arrived, and I quickly got up, saying, "Hey, that's my friend." I hurried toward her car, but as she parked and got out, he followed me and touched my shoulder. "Hey, wait," he said. "You promised to give me your number." I hadn't, but I felt trapped. Hoping to appease him, I gave a fake number. Immediately, he called it, expecting my phone to ring. My friend jumped in, saying, "Hey Thoris, didn't your phone die?" I caught on quickly and said, "Oh, yeah. I forgot. I'll get back to you later." Then we waved and briskly walked to her car. He didn't follow but watched as we drove away. I asked her to take the long way home to make sure he wouldn't find out where I lived. I was working as a stripper for a time in a small town in the Southwest while I saved up and figured out my next move in life. I really enjoyed my job. It was at a small club where about 5 of us girls danced regularly. After a few weeks there, I'd grown pretty fond of them all, as well as the DJ and bartenders. You always get the occasional out-of-town girls coming through to dance, desperate locals looking to get their cars out of impound, or thrill-seeking girls who think it's going to be some life-affirming experience of empowerment or just to mess with their ex-husbands. Our club didn't usually see much of this since there was a larger club across town that was often busier, but of course, we had our share of one-night-only dancers. This industry can obviously attract some real weirdos at the best of times, but for the most part, everyone I met during my time at the club, patrons included, were decent, usually just lonely people. Like I said, I really enjoyed working there for the most part. Since we had such a high turnover rate for bouncers, on nights we had one at all, I felt protective of my fellow girls. I'm tall, have RBF, and generally just don't take nonsense from people. Even under the best circumstances, you really can't be too trusting or naive in these kinds of environments, so I always tried to keep an eye out. On this particular night, I remember stopping at CVS like I often did to buy some whiskey before my shift. When I was walking through the in-store alarm gates to get to the alcohol section, the alarm went off. I'd already paid, so it was fine, but I distinctly remember thinking, it kind of snapped me to attention, if that makes sense. I thought, that was weird. I wonder if something's going to go down tonight. I proceeded to work. After we got ready, we were out on the front porch area, smoking like we always did while we waited for customers to arrive. It was me and two of the other regular dancers. I remember it was really windy that night, which is always unsettling, especially in that desert town. For some reason, we started talking about bad vibes. One of the girls, let's call her Cindy, began telling a story about when she worked at the larger club. One night, she got to work and immediately felt like something was off. Later that night, she got jumped in the dressing room by 3 out-of-town girls. She had to whack one of them in the face with her shoe, blood everywhere. It was a whole thing. The cops were called. Cindy was okay, but the out-of-town girls escaped with her bag. Moral of the story, don't mess with out-of-town girls at the club. Ever. We got kind of serious talking about it, and I said something like, I just want you all to know, I'd absolutely throw down for you, no questions asked, if it ever came to it. It felt like a random conversation to have, especially after the alarm thing. The whole vibe was uncharacteristically somber. Later on, we were all outside again, but this time there were more of us, 3 more dancers, the DJ, and the door girl. A car pulled up, and 3 teens, I guess, stepped out. They claimed they were around 20, but they looked very young to me. I can't say much to describe the boy, other than that he looked normal and vaguely emo. Then there was a blonde girl with this really intense, sunken posture. She was almost drooping over herself. Her head hung forward, her hair all falling around her face, and her expression was just miserable, like Eeyore but without any charm. Finally, there was this small, weird, and, sorry to say, ugly girl. I'm no supermodel, but this girl was just unpleasant looking. She was short and plump, had teeth veering toward bucktooth territory, a piggy nose, lots of freckles, and a squealy, high-pitched voice. I instantly disliked her. She launched into a long, dramatic story about why she was there to dance. Something about taking care of her kids and not wanting to live with her grandma anymore, who was putting her up while she got her life together. Or something. It took forever to get her to stop talking long enough to even walk through the front door. Here's the thing about strip clubs, no one cares why you're there, and no one is going to ask. So it was already weird that she was spewing so much personal information to almost every employee of the club. She'd never danced before, she was nervous, and we all assured her she'd be fine, just relax and try to have some fun. We decided her stage name would be Annie because her orangey-brown curls made her look like an ugly orphan Annie. As soon as we get into the dressing room, she starts loudly and obnoxiously making extremely inappropriate comments about me and my body, saying I'm attractive and she wants to sleep with me. Yes, this is a strip club, but you still don't just harass people, especially people you've just met and at what might be your new job. I decide to let it go for now. She's like 5 feet 2 inches, and I'm over 6 in my heels, so I don't feel at all threatened, because I think this girl is unhinged, and I don't even want to be in the same room with her if I don't have to. She then proceeds to tell us she has no clothes to dance in, no shoes, and no makeup. She has brought nothing with her. Okay, that's a little weird. We hustle some stuff together for her. She continues to talk almost non-stop about her grandma, adding details to her odd sob story, all the while asking everyone to borrow stuff, odd stuff, like eyeliner and clothes. These are things you wouldn't normally ask someone you didn't know to borrow. The rest of the girls, being the lovely people they are, try their best to accommodate her and make her feel less nervous, but they're definitely wondering what's going on with this girl. As the night goes on, things just get stranger. While sitting at the bar, watching a girl's set on stage, she says in astonishment, "We have to take our tops off?" I'm like, seriously? You are in a strip club. What do you mean, we have to take our tops off? Anyway, she finally goes up and struggles her way through one set, 2 songs. Then, she very dramatically trips as she's leaving the stage, making 3 people carry her into the dressing room, claiming she twisted her ankle. We sit her down in a chair and examine the ankle. Nothing. She's literally fine and very obviously lying, at least to me. The door girl wraps it up with a makeshift bandage. Annie continues asking to borrow stuff, our phones, makeup, food, drinks. At some point, she says she's going to call her grandma. She starts a video call and hobbles toward the bathroom. Then, I hear a loud yelp and a thump. Annie claims her knee has given out on the leg opposite her twisted ankle, and now she's lying on the bathroom floor, vaguely clutching one of her legs while making dramatic faces to the person on the other end of the call. When I go to help her up, I notice the person on the video call looks exactly like the guy who dropped Annie off, but he's wearing one of those face masks for sleep apnea, with tubes and everything. The phone is up close, and the screen is all black except for the face. So maybe it was her grandma, and I didn't see it correctly, but I swear that screen freaked me out. In that 1 second, I went from this girl as an absolute nuisance with some kind of agenda to who is this girl, and what's her agenda? As soon as she sees me, she ends the call. We put her back in her chair, and the other girls are gently trying to convince her to call her friends to come pick her up since this isn't working out. She doesn't want to dance and can't walk, but also doesn't seem to want to go home. She has a cell phone but claims she can't use it to make calls, besides the video call to grandma, apparently, for vague and unsatisfactory reasons. It's hard to recall all the details now, but it felt like she was trying to get us to do everything for her, like borrow our phones or make calls for her, while making excuses not to leave. If she were just a nervous girl who changed her mind about stripping but wanted to save face, which, again, is ridiculous because no one cares, by claiming she was injured, why wouldn't she leave? We knew her friends were on call to come get her because they literally told us that themselves when they left. None of it added up. And on top of all this, she isn't wearing any pants. The pants she walked into the club wearing are lying at her feet on the floor, but she now claims they are too tight and that she can't get them over her injured ankle and knee, neither of which are swollen, red, or look in any way injured. She is pretty obviously not in actual pain. I've seen strippers in pain, y'all, it is a physical job, and keeps forgetting which knee she claimed gave out. She repeatedly refuses to put her pants back on and wants to borrow a pair of someone else's pants. No one, obviously, wants to give her their pants. The door girl and the rest of the dancers are completely flustered. Nobody knows what to do. There's just the weirdest, most unsettling vibe emanating from this strange, pantsless Annie, and she refuses to leave our dressing room or the club. Nobody can figure out what she wants or how to get her out of here, especially since, aside from the pants, she claims she can't walk but also won't use her phone. I'd only been there a couple of weeks at that point, and I didn't want to overstep my authority, but I'd finally had enough. I mean, I could sense something was off with her from the start. I'd already given her a pass for behaving inappropriately toward me because I try to be merciful like that, but I have my limits. Refusing to put your own pants on? I mean, seriously? So, I haul myself to the back, grabbing the door girl on the way so I have a witness. I stand over Annie in all my stripper glory, looking down from my 6 feet 4 inches height, staring into her beady little eyes. Are those your pants? I ask, pointing. Yes, but... Stop talking. Are those the pants you wore in here? Yes. Then put your pants on. Now. Slowly, begrudgingly, glaring at me, she puts on the pants. The door girl and I escort her to the booth behind the front desk station, where I stand next to her while she uses the club phone to call her friends. I tell her she is to sit in the booth until her friends arrive, at which point she is to leave and never come back. She sits in the booth, visibly annoyed, until emo boy and hunchback girl arrive about 20 minutes later. Miraculously, the majority of her limp has disappeared. She can now walk unaided. As they scurry out the door, I hear Hunchback ask her in a fierce whisper, "What happened?" Fuming, Annie shoots back, "I'll tell you in the car, just go." I worked there for another 4 months and met all kinds of people, women and men, but never anyone as strange or unsettling as Annie. Every single one of us there that night was absolutely sure that chick was up to something. Not just something bad, but something genuinely sinister. The fact that none of us had even an inkling of what that bad something was made it all the more disturbing, even in retrospect. Talking about it later, we all felt like we dodged a bullet that night. Doing that kind of job, you develop not only a pretty thick skin for strange people, but also a decent intuition for when something is off. Girls I knew who'd done time in prison admitted Annie had freaked them out completely. I will never forget the face I saw on the other end of that video call. She remains, to this day, the strangest human being I have ever encountered, inside or outside the club. When I was about 19 years old, I got hired in the fashion department of a local supercenter store. It's a bit like Walmart, but exclusive to the Midwest. At the time, I had the sides and back of my hair shaved, and the top of my hair was bleached blonde and twisted into a high bun. I promise this is relevant to the story. I had just finished my computer training 2 days earlier and was on the floor alone, stocking some baby clothes. About a box or two into my stocking, an announcement came over the speakers, informing customers that our credit card readers were down, but we could still take cash. I heard a couple of groans around me, but it seemed like most people were content to continue shopping until it was announced that the card readers were back up. I crouched down to grab more clothes out of a box when a guy walked up to me, holding a few items. "Guy, hey, miss, I just have a few items I wanted to buy real quick. Do you know how long the card readers will be down?" Me, still crouched on the floor, I'm not sure. I don't think this happens very often, but they said they can still take cash for now. "Guy, I only have a card on me." "Damn, that sucks." Me, "I'm sorry about that. Is there anything I can help you find while you wait to check out?" "Guy, nah, I guess I'll just hang around. I can stick over here and just bother you." I didn't respond to his comment and just nodded, getting back to folding. The man asked me a few more random questions before his behavior turned creepy. He started walking a bit closer to me, and he was at least a foot taller than I am. "Guy, so, why do you have your hair like that? All bleached on top?" Me, "Oh, I just like the way it looks." "Guy, no, that's not it. You're doing it for attention." Me, "Nope, I honestly just like how it looks. Plus, the shaved parts keep me cooler in the summer." Guy, "What? Your family doesn't give you enough attention? You don't get enough attention from boys?" Me, "I don't know. I just like my hair like this." Guy, "Alright, well, since you want attention so bad, how about I wait until you get off work and show you the kind of attention I think you deserve?" At this point, he was practically hovering over me. I must have looked really intimidated because a woman immediately ran over to us when she heard him say that. She quickly pulled me away, saying she needed help getting an item down from a high shelf. I'm not sure if the woman was genuinely trying to save me or if she really needed help reaching something. I spoke to my manager about the incident later that day, and she informed me that there was nothing she could do about customers like that, and I would just have to deal with it. When I got off that night, I practically ran to my car, praying the guy wasn't waiting for me. I didn't stick around long enough to find out. I quit pretty soon after that because I was so shaken. I have no idea what he might have had planned, but I'm so thankful for that woman. I am a 21-year-old male, previously unexposed to the true creeps of the world, and I have never encountered anything quite like what happened today with my girlfriend. It felt straight out of a horror film. First, a bit of background. My girlfriend is moving to a small town for graduate school, so we decided to take a trip this week to find her a place to rent. Her parents suggested I accompany her instead of them. My girlfriend contacted many landlords to view different properties, most of which were managed by legitimate realty and apartment companies. However, our first meeting was set up through a Craigslist advertisement. The house was in a nice neighborhood. The property owner initially requested quite a bit of information about my girlfriend, such as all her living situations over the past year. It didn't seem suspicious at first, as he appeared normal over text. My girlfriend scheduled the appointment in advance, sending him texts and calling him as requested several hours before the meeting. However, he didn't respond to any of them. We decided to head to the house anyway, hoping he would show up to give us a tour. Now, let me shift to the present tense. We're walking outside the house when he suddenly calls my girlfriend. She tells him we're there now. Where? He asks. My girlfriend explains that I'm with her to help evaluate the property. She starts to look confused. Then she mentions my name. She hangs up and sits down on the curb near the house. That was so creepy, she says. He talks so slow and got mad when I said you were with me. Apparently, he paused when she said we'd told her, it's just, sometimes people don't bother to tell me these things, that they're with their husbands or boyfriends. It just comes as a surprise sometimes. Then he asked for my name. She's unsettled, and I start to get a bad feeling. I ask her more about his name and what he's told her before. We have about 5 minutes until the appointment. I quickly look up his name on my phone, but there are no results. I search for his so-called real estate business, but nothing comes up. As we sit on the curb, we notice a greasy-haired middle-aged man crossing the street from the direction of the house. He opens a rundown red car and gets inside. We think it's him until it isn't. As the appointment time approaches, we walk to the porch. The greasy-haired man starts his car, makes a U-turn, and drives off just as we cross the street. Then, a different car pulls up on the opposite side of the street. It's him. Let's call him Jay. Jay is over 50 years old, tall, wearing dirty old jeans, sneakers, and a whole riddle t-shirt topped with a baseball cap. His most striking feature is his eyes, wide open, with one eye larger than the other, blinking less frequently. We introduce ourselves, but he refuses to shake hands. Sorry, my hands are dirty. Just got off work, he says, offering no explanation about what kind of work. Something feels off. He speaks awkwardly, avoids questions about himself, and instead probes us with personal questions. Where are you from? More specifically, what city? What school do you go to? Have you ever lived anywhere else? His demeanor and emotional detachment put us on edge. Instead of showing us the house, he leads us around to the backyard. The washer and dryer are in the basement. Follow me. Alarms go off in my head. No way. But we're still interested in the house, so we hesitantly follow. I remain vigilant about maintaining distance and watching our surroundings. When he unlocks the basement door, I insist that he go first. He reluctantly agrees. As he slowly descends the stairs, he flips a light switch, but the light doesn't come on. He hums quietly and steps into the darkness. My girlfriend is in front of me, and I stay by the door, watching her exit. He doesn't say a word as he fiddles with the washer and dryer. Then, without warning, he turns and heads back up the stairs. My girlfriend, sensing the unsettling vibe, keeps her distance as well. Jay leads us back to the porch, where he softly knocks on the door. The property has an adjacent, rentable house next to this section. As I look in, I notice a few things: backpacks placed on the dining room chairs, a screen door since the main door is open, and books perfectly stacked on the dining room table. As Jay begins opening the door to our side of the building, he mentions the co-residents. However, he doesn't say much other than that they are students. He walks into the flat, and the main door is slightly ajar behind us. "Close that, will you?" he says to me. I carefully close the door, then test it to see if it will open. It doesn't. The door is locked. I quickly begin fiddling with the latches within sight. This cannot be happening, I think to myself, now fully in fight mode. I find one that unlocks the entrance, and just as I open the door, he barks from inside the flat. "Just close the door," he says harshly. At this point, we're feeling weirder about this man by the minute. He shows us the kitchen, but as he talks, he stares with an inhuman look in his eyes. When he stares at me, I meet his gaze, trying to convey my own fearlessness against his emotionless expression. He gives up on me and locks eyes with my girlfriend instead. He stares and stares, and she becomes understandably unsettled by his constant, unbroken eye contact. Yes, we could have technically left by now, but in the moment, it's not exactly easy to come up with an excuse. So instead, we view the rest of the small home, all the while itching to get out of there. I focus solely on keeping myself between him and my girlfriend, purposefully positioning myself to face him at all times. He tries to block us in the small bathroom by standing in front of the door, but I never turn my back to him. Because of this, he keeps a slight distance. Some strange things happen. He occasionally slips his hands into his pockets, but I blatantly watch his hands, anticipating any sudden movements. Each time I do this, he casually pulls his hands back out. He starts rambling about how this place is perfect for a college girl. I tread carefully, as if there's someone else lurking around the corner. I've never felt paranoia like that before. Then it hits me just how stereotypical this house is for a college male, the supposed tenant of the home. Protein powder and zinc supplements sit on the counter. Quinoa and fresh vegetable packs are there too, like something out of a staged movie set. Yet, the place is messy: crumbs on the sofa, clothes piled in a corner, framed band posters on the walls. He makes casual remarks about these details. The tour is almost over when he abruptly stops at the attic. "And this is the attic, for storage only." "That's pretty much it," he says, but he doesn't take us up there like he did with the other rooms. When we ask if the furniture comes with the place, he first says no, then changes his mind, saying we could make it work if we wanted. As I head back downstairs, I keep him in my peripheral vision the entire time. You can imagine the relief we feel when we finally reach the porch. His slow talking, his evasive answers to personal questions, it all felt off. For instance, when I asked him where he was from, he paused for several seconds before vaguely replying, "Upstate." When we finally leave, he shakes our hands, staring into my girlfriend's eyes again. I watch him walk to his car as we stroll away. But as we're about to turn the corner, I see him walking back toward the house. Later, I look up his name more in depth and find some troubling details. This supposed property owner is listed online with an address for a secluded forest home, a trailer in the driveway, trees blocking the view from the street. Worse, this property is listed as his real estate office. He advertises other properties, including one claiming that 2 female college students are searching for a 3rd female roommate. The most chilling discovery? An alternate address for him, the room next door to the house he showed us. The one with the backpacks and books on the table, supposedly belonging to the other tenants. But we didn't see anyone else that day. Whether it was our heightened perception or genuine fear, the situation felt staged, just a little too perfectly messy. And he gave us no tangible facts about the supposed co-residents. All we know is that he was annoyed my girlfriend brought me along. He was vague about the people who lived there and about himself. He tried to pierce us with his apathetic gaze, speaking in his slow, unreadable drawl. In hindsight, why did the greasy-haired man leave as soon as we arrived, right after Jay realized my girlfriend wasn't alone? So many red flags went off in those 20 minutes. I've never experienced anything like that in my life, an overwhelming sense of a rotten, dangerous aura. What if my girlfriend had come alone? What if it had been just one person descending into the basement with him? I shudder to think what might have happened. This happened about 2 years ago during my 2nd year at university. I was 20. For context, I'm French, so if anything seems odd about how I describe university life, that's why. At the time, I lived in a government-owned apartment building on the 3rd floor. My direct neighbor was my younger sister, who was studying at the same university. One other important detail is that I'm disabled. My right leg became useless after an accident when I was 13, and I suffer from debilitating chronic pain that keeps me bedridden and nonverbal unless I take a twice-daily dose of prescribed morphine. All of this is crucial to the story, so bear with me. When I take my medication, I'm able to leave my bed. On my worst days, I have to either use a wheelchair or a cane to get around. Isn't it great that we lived on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator? On top of that, as you might guess, morphine is a very strong pain medication. It messes with your visual and auditory perception, makes you sleepy and dizzy, slows your reflexes, numbs your nervous system, and can even make you paranoid. At that time, I had been taking morphine for less than 6 months, after 10 years of trying other pain medications. I was still dealing with the full force of its side effects, most of which are gone now. For me, that mainly meant auditory hallucinations, sleepiness, dizziness, and delayed reflexes. By then, I was used to hearing random noises, like clapping or clicking sounds, but I never hallucinated human voices. That night, I went to the city center to meet friends. This was a rare occasion for me, and I do mean rare. I didn't go out more than once every 2 months or so, for several reasons that my friends, bless them, understood perfectly. Morphine means no drinking, so that's half the fun of going to a bar gone right from the start. Despite the helpful nature of the meds, I was still am in a tremendous amount of pain if I stand for more than a couple of minutes. I knew I'd have to do a lot of standing at the bar, plus walking back from the bus stop to my building, which was about a 5-minute walk. But I went anyway, like I did on rare occasions. For a few days, rumors had been circulating about a group kidnapping people from my university. 2 girls had reportedly disappeared, and it was suspected that a blue van was involved. These reports were being shared on our majors group and the university's Facebook group, with the same details every time. My friends and I were skeptical, especially about the blue van, because we figured the van wouldn't still be driving around if the information had spread so widely. I wasn't thinking about any of that as I made my way back from the bar around midnight, early, I know, but I was in a lot of pain. The bus stopped running at 12:30 a.m., and missing it would mean waking up my sister to pick me up from the tram station, as I couldn't physically manage the 20-minute walk. I got on the bus, which only had 3 other passengers, none of whom got off at my stop. Now, bear in mind, I was in an extreme amount of pain. My vision was blurring at the edges, and I was swaying side to side, trying to minimize the weight on my leg. I had just taken a fast-acting morphine dose to help me make it through the 5-minute walk back to my building. Unlike my twice-daily high-dose medication, these fast-acting pills could be taken as needed for quick relief. The downside of this particular pill was that it would knock me out in 30 minutes. For about 20 minutes before that, I would feel incredibly sleepy and almost high before the effect faded where I passed out. I got off the bus. On my right was a parking lot in front of a bakery with lots of cars. This was normal since many government-owned student flats were nearby, and most people parked there. The road I needed to take was straight ahead from the bus stop, leading directly to my building, which was on the right. There were a few parking spots in front of the building and a wheelchair ramp leading to a magnetic door. To enter, you needed your student ID to unlock the door, followed by a key for your specific building. As I passed the parking lot, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Since I was half out of it from pain and medication, I didn't bother turning to look. I heard a noise but assumed I was hallucinating, so I kept walking. Then, the streetlights reflected off a car window, which caught my attention for some reason. I turned my head slightly and saw an old, beat-up white car low to the ground. In the driver's seat sat an Algerian man in his mid-50s. The neighborhood was a mix of students and Algeria-born residents, so his presence wasn't unusual. What gave me pause was the fact that someone was sitting awake in the front seat of a car at 1 a.m. But again, I'm out of it, so I don't question it. I don't even stop walking because, at this point, my only thought is, put one foot in front of the other. There you go, you're almost there, you're almost done with the pain. Literally, all my attention, my focus, was on putting one foot after the other because of the debilitating pain. I walk past the small roundabout to my left, still going straight, when I hear a car starting. I don't know why that was the thing that slapped me in the face, but suddenly, I was worried. My heart was beating fast, probably half the meds and half the fear. But also, I was well aware that substances tend to make me paranoid, so I tried to calm down. I see the headlights coming from behind me, drawing a long shadow in front of me. In a second, I run through the calculations. I'm still about 300 meters, 1,000 feet, says Google, from my building. Then I need to get my ID out and open the door, a slow, automatic, magnetic door. I can't run. I can barely walk. I'm up to the head in substances. It's the middle of the night, and I'm alone, with no residential building close enough to hear a scream. That's when I start to panic. I'm right to do so. The car catches up to me and slows down to my walking speed. I notice that the man isn't alone in the car anymore. Someone is in the passenger seat, and there's movement in the back, but I don't turn my head because I try to pretend I didn't notice them slowing down. I had my earphones in, with no music, as I didn't turn it back on after the bus ride. I just keep walking, hoping with everything I have that they'll leave me alone. I'm trying to walk faster, but I'm in so much pain a few tears fall down. I can hear that they're calling for my attention, but not what they're saying. Finally, I see the lane going up to my building. I take my backpack off and shove my hand down the front pocket, fumbling because my nervous response is terrible, thanks, meds, and I can't feel my fingers. I'm shaking like crazy. I can't find my ID. At that point, I'm close to a panic attack. My heart is beating too fast, and I'm feeling close to fainting from the combined pain and terror. I turn to face the wheelchair slope when I see, from the corner of my eye, the car stopping abruptly right next to the slope and the car door slamming open. I don't know how I did it, because I was close to fainting, but I managed to run the last 10 feet to the door and slap my ID on the reader, yelling at the door to open faster. I could hear people running behind me. The door finally opened enough for me to slip in, and I slammed it shut behind me. I heard the men run into the door with a loud noise, cursing and yelling things to me. I didn't stick around to hear what they had to say. I fumbled with my keys to the point of almost dropping them before opening the door to my flat complex. I got inside on shaky legs, and as soon as the door closed behind me, I dropped to the floor and had the worst panic attack of my life. When I managed to put myself back together and painstakingly climbed the 3 flights of stairs, I crawled into my sister's flat. We left our doors open for each other for precisely those circumstances and woke her up, telling her the whole story. She told me later I was deathly pale, so much that I scared her enough that she offered for me to share our single bed that night. I was too distressed to refuse. The worst part is, this isn't the end of the story. My sister went out to bars a lot more than I did, as she's able-bodied and drop-dead gorgeous. About 3 weeks later, she called me in the middle of the night as she was coming back from a bar. She had seen the exact car I described in the parking lot at the bus stop. She didn't stop to see if there was anyone inside. She reacted and sprinted to her building. Of course, she was a lot faster than my drugged, disabled self, so she made it to the door, where I was waiting for her, having it open from the inside, just as the car stopped in the lane. After that, we left a note on our flat complex's door to explain everything to other people, posted about it on every university group we knew of, and we contacted the police, who helpfully told us they could do nothing without catching them in the act, but that they'd probably send someone to patrol, as it matched the reports they had gotten that sparked the whole blue van rumors in the first place. In the following year it took to finish my degree, neither my sister nor I saw those men or their car again, but we still hear from people the same kind of story being shared from other parts of the city. As far as we can tell, they're still active, and 2 years later, I'm still distressed about it. This happened when I was a freshman in college. The Mexican border was considered sketchy at the time, but I had heard it was safer to go to Progreso compared to places like Juarez. At the time, I attended college in Corpus Christi, Texas. I was about 19 and decided to drive 3 hours to Mexico with my roommate, Ryan, also 19, and our girlfriends on a Sunday night. We wanted to eat real Mexican food, get some beers, explore, and do whatever else you might do in Mexico. In hindsight, probably a terrible idea. We were both clean-cut, generic-looking white guys with 18-year-old blonde girlfriends. Basically, we stuck out like a sore thumb in Mexico. When we arrived at the border crossing in Progreso, there was a parking lot where you could park and walk across the border. At the time, you didn't need a passport. You could just show your license and walk across. As we spoke to the border agent and showed our IDs, he gave us a very concerned, stern look, the kind of parent gives their children when they know they're about to make a bad decision. Very seriously, he asked us what we planned to do. After we told him, he paused and said, "Please be very, very careful." I felt a twinge in my stomach but brushed it off and kept walking across the large metal bridge, illuminated by high-powered lamps. As soon as we crossed the border, it felt like a completely different world. The streets were dirty, unpaved, and poorly lit. People were loitering in corners and shadows, selling things on the street. We walked about 100 yards in and were immediately approached by a stranger. The man was in his late 30s, muscular and stocky, with a heavy Spanish accent but able to speak broken English. He was very chatty and wanted to be our new best friend. He claimed to know the best restaurants, the best bars, and how to show us a good time. I was immediately creeped out by this guy, but nobody else in our group seemed to share my unease at first. He just seemed overly friendly and eager to help us. Note, this kind of behavior sets off alarm bells for me now when I travel. He followed us to a local restaurant, where we sat down to order. As we ate, he dominated the conversation. He was very overbearing, insistent on showing us around, and started trying to make plans for the rest of the evening. Everyone in the group was becoming uncomfortable. After we paid, he went to the restroom. While he was gone, I told Ryan and the girls that we needed to lose this guy, and everyone agreed. While our new best friend was in the restroom, I thought it was the perfect opportunity to leave unnoticed. Then, the waitress came over and, in a hushed voice in broken English, pointed to the bathroom and said, "That man, no good man, Mui Ma, no good man." Now, everybody was freaked out. Since we had already paid, we got up quickly to leave and ditch this guy. As we walked out the door, he came out of the restroom and ran to catch up with us. His demeanor changed dramatically. He was no longer laughing or joking. He seemed genuinely irritated that we tried to ditch him. He became insistent that we follow him to the best bar in town. We were all scared but unsure of what to do, so we trailed behind him down the main street, exchanging worried looks. Periodically, he ran across the street to talk to what looked like Mexican police officers. These men wore shirts that said Policia, but they had baggy clothes, pistols tucked into their waistbands, and were smoking cigarettes on the street corner. They definitely didn't look like legitimate cops. At this point, everything felt wrong. Then, the man pulled out a cigarette and started smoking it, except it wasn't lit. He continued smoking it without lighting it. What the heck? I felt like the leader of our group because this guy mostly spoke to me while Ryan and the girls stayed quiet, unsure of what to do. I mentally kept track of how far we had walked from the border crossing. The lights from the bridge were getting smaller and smaller. The final straw came when he led us to a side street that opened into an empty parking lot. In the parking lot, there was a van parked by itself. He insisted the bar was just a little farther down the side street. My heart started pounding, and my face felt flushed. I snapped and said, "Hell no, we're not going any farther. We're going back to the US." I looked at my friends and told them to start walking back toward the lights. We started walking away, and the man became visibly angrier. He followed us, yelling and screaming, until we reached the border bridge. Once we were close enough to the border agents, he finally gave up and disappeared into the streets. We had only been there for about 2 hours, but I had enough of Mexico. We were so relieved to be back in the US, driving home. On the way back, everyone was giddy with nervous laughter as we realized just how close we had come to a potentially dangerous situation. This happened almost 2 months ago to this day. I think it's worth mentioning that while this story takes place in a Southeast Asian city with a population of a little over 1.5 million, I didn't always live here. I was born and raised in a small town in the Midwestern United States. You know, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and we only gain attention during an election year. Anyway, my parents and I made the big move in 2014 due to a number of reasons, the biggest one being so my mother could be with her family since this is her homeland. However, the town where all my relatives live is about 8 hours away. We had to move to our city because it's the safest in the region for foreigners, and my dad is a pretty obvious white man. Now, unlike every other college student in the world, I hadn't done much this summer. The heat was blistering all hours of the day, and I didn't have money to spend even if I was willing to leave our air-conditioned apartment. The only thing enticing me to the outdoors were the incessant sounds of construction due to a new unit being added to our complex. However, leaving was obviously inevitable, so toward the end of the month, my parents and I went to buy groceries. The next day, my mom and I went to buy some things we had initially forgotten, and the day after that, the two of us went out again to pay some bills. That made 3 consecutive days of going out for the first time in literally a month. To say I was exhausted was an understatement. By 7 p.m. on the 3rd night, I was already fast asleep on the living room couch. My mom woke up around 10 that same night and told me to head up to my room. I was too tired to do my entire night routine, so I quickly brushed my teeth and went upstairs. I noticed that my cat was already asleep in my bed, which happens once in a blue moon since he's basically my mom's shadow, so I got into bed while contorting myself at an angle that wouldn't disturb him. Cat lovers, you know what I'm talking about. I turned on a dim light, plugged in my phone, and started playing a random YouTube video that eventually fell asleep. I didn't know what time it was, but I awoke to the feeling of my bed shaking. I tend to ignore movements like this because they happen often when my cat sleeps with me, as he has a habit of scratching his ear. But there was a pretty strong earthquake just the night before, so I assumed it was another one, making me open my eyes and look down at my cat to see which of the two it was. Indeed, he was scratching his ear. Oh, and there was my mom at the foot of my bed. Nothing out of the ordinary. She was probably checking on me before her and my dad went out for their 5 a.m. walk, as routine, and was bending down to pet the cat. I closed my eyes and was just about to slip back into slumber when my half-asleep brain realized that a number of other things were indeed out of the ordinary. With eyes that were barely open, I looked at my mom with blurred vision. The first thing I noticed was that she was wearing one of my high school t-shirts. My mom and I are far from the same size, and she doesn't have a history of borrowing my clothes. Weird, but not unsettling. Maybe she ran out of clean exercise shirts and decided to use one of mine. I then noticed that she was also wearing another one of my high school t-shirts, but this one was wrapped around her head in a weird way that outlined the shape of it, not covering anything, but just framing the profile. In my peripheral, I noticed that my closet doors were wide open. My mom always nagged me to close them because she said it wasted the cool air coming from the air conditioner, so I made sure to keep them closed whenever I wasn't getting ready. Another random realization hit me when my brain finally registered the fact that while my mom does pet my cat when she comes in to check on me, she's never bent down like the person in my room was doing. Looking back now, I don't think I've seen her bend like that since I was a kid. Keep in mind, all these thoughts flooded my mind in about 5 seconds. Still, my half-asleep and half-stupid brain was more focused on why my mom was wearing my clothes as opposed to all the things that were off in this situation. I sat up a bit and squinted my eyes so I could read the shirt since there was writing on the back that would help me distinguish if it was actually mine and not just one that looked like mine. That's when the person turned to look right at me before running out of my room, maintaining an ungodly crouching position that will be burned in my mind for the rest of my life. It wasn't until he was near the stairs that I fully processed what was happening. That person was not my mom. They weren't even a female. Instantly, I shot out of bed and instinctively wrapped my blanket around me to cover my night clothes that suddenly felt so revealing. It was only then I began screaming. I hesitatingly followed him out of my room and watched as he ran down the wooden stairs with deafening steps that echoed throughout the 3rd floor, almost drowning out my piercing cry. If I was going to get my parents' attention, who were sleeping on the other side of a closed door on the 2nd floor, I needed to be louder. I stood at the foot of the stairs and pushed my lungs to their limit. I could practically feel the capacity stretch inside my rib cage. After what felt like ages, but was probably only another 5 seconds, my parents' door swung open and my mom ran up the stairs with a panic-stricken expression that I will never forget. She grabbed me by the shoulders and shouted, "What? What's wrong?" I turned to look at her with my mouth agape and my brows furrowed in a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Had she not seen the man when he ran right past their bedroom door? It all happened so fast, I wasn't sure if they had crossed paths or not. "Someone's in the house," I responded with a voice that I honestly didn't recognize. Without missing a beat, she wrapped her arm around me and ushered me down the stairs. "Grab the gun," she shouted in the country's native language. We ran into my parents' bedroom, where my dad stood in the doorway with tired eyes and slumped posture. I pushed him into the room and turned around to close the door, simultaneously fiddling with the light switch so we weren't in complete darkness. My movements were shaky and spastic, causing my fingers to fumble and flicker the lights on and off before eventually being able to lock the door. "What are you doing?" My dad asked with a soft laugh as he switched on the light after my attempts proved to be futile. I turned to him with the same incredulous expression I had when looking at my mom. He had been standing in the doorway to his room, in perfect view of the man running away, yet he seemed to be oblivious. "There's someone in the house," I repeated, watching his face instantly drop at my words. With the door now locked, I turned to my parents and watched them silently, waiting for them to say or do something. For 19 years, they had taken care of me and catered to my every want and need. Now, there they stood, just as scared and defenseless as I was. In that moment, they were just people. My dad, an infamous type A personality, kept his focus on the floor, most likely processing the entire situation before deciding what to do next. My mother was the complete opposite. Her cell phone was in one hand while the other hand was running through her hair so many times that I was sure strands were going to end up in between her fingers. "I can't call 911. It's not working." I took the phone from her and dialed it myself, bringing the phone up to my ear only to hear a monotone voice say, "Sorry, but your balance is too low to make this call." In this country, most of the phones are prepaid, so if you don't have money on your account, you can't make any calls or texts. However, my mom said that she had added money to her account just a few hours earlier. I tried calling my aunt, who lives 8 hours away, and it worked. It was then I figured out that you can only use cell phones to call other cell phones, and you can only use landlines to call other landlines, i.e. 911. The only problem was that our landline was in the second floor hallway, a few feet from the other side of the door. Once I told my parents what our only option was, my mom opened the window and began shouting for help in her native language. Similar to a knee-jerk reaction, I instantly shut the window. "Don't do that. They'll know we're defenseless, and they'll come back." At the time this happened, we had been in the room for about 40 minutes. I was convinced that if they had left and then heard her screaming, they would come back since they would know we were sitting ducks. "Are you sure you saw someone? Maybe you were just dreaming?" My dad said, this being his first string of words since barricading ourselves. "How could he have gotten in? The door has 2 locks and a heavy pole across it." A little context about the pole. After the lock on our screen door broke, my mom had insisted on putting a metal pole across the door to ensure no one would be able to get in. "No, I know what I saw," I answered without hesitation, but my brain started dissecting the possibility of the figure simply being a figment of my imagination. The sounds and movements he made were so vivid, but the situation as a whole seemed too surreal. There was no way someone could get inside with that pole acting as a shield, and neither of my parents had seen the man. Internally, even I wasn't 100% sure of myself, but on the outside, I stuck to my guns. "I saw a man." "Okay, then we need to get out of this room and call the police," my dad said restlessly. My overthinking got the best of me as I thought about us leaving the room. Were there more people? Were they waiting for us? Were they right outside the door? Or were they hiding and would spring out when we least expected it? Maybe they were still in our apartment, continuing to raid through our things since they knew we were too scared to leave. Had they heard my mom screaming for help and come back? We searched the room for weapons to protect ourselves with, but we wouldn't find anything even remotely useful. What happened to the gun my mom was shouting for earlier, you ask? It never existed. She just said that so the man would hopefully leave out of fear. So with half of a pair of broken scissors in my dad's hand and a small floor fan in my mom's hand, we prepared ourselves for whatever was on the other side of the door. My dad unlocked the door and swung it open swiftly, hoping to catch anyone out there off guard. The complete silence, mixed with the eerie yellow lighting coming from our hallway, seemed like a scene in a horror movie. Straight ahead, we all noticed that the door to the second floor balcony was wide open and the screen on the window next to it had been pried open. The first feeling to run through me was assurance. Assurance of knowing that I wasn't crazy and that I hadn't made this up. The second feeling to run through me was pure dread, knowing that I wasn't crazy and I unfortunately hadn't made this up. We searched the second floor and found no one and nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. We then moved on to the first floor and found our pitcher of water dripping condensation on the kitchen table. My mom asked me if I had forgotten to put it back before I went to bed, but I distinctly remember only brushing my teeth. I knew I hadn't gotten it out. Our windows have the glass on the outside and the screen on the inside, which is contradictory to typical American windows, and we saw that the glass windows were wide open and the screen had been pried with. However, both of the locks on the door were bolted and the pole was still in place. We figured that the man had initially attempted to come in by putting his hand through the small gap he made in the screen window, trying to reach for the door so he could unlock it. However, I guess his calculations were off and he couldn't make the distance. That's when he climbed up to the second floor, probably by scaling the apartment that the construction workers had yet to finish, and did the same procedure to the balcony window. He was successful this time because the distance is much shorter. We called 911 a total of 5 times, and it took them 45 minutes to get to our apartment, despite the fact that the police station is a 3-minute drive away. While waiting, my mom knocked on the other apartments to let them know what was going on. Now, our complex consists of 4 apartments, but I'd say it looks more like a paired home with 4 different sections. The first one is rented out to an online business company, the second is rented out to a family who had just moved in that exact night, we're in the third, and the fourth has no tenants. Neither of them answered, probably because who would answer the door at 2:30 a.m.? The police eventually came and told us that someone had made a call earlier, saying that they heard a woman screaming for help, my mom, but they couldn't find the location of the screams. They searched the house but found no one and didn't even tell us how to file a report. Yeah, they were pretty useless. The next day, my mom talked to the people at the first apartment and they were obviously shaken up. They told her that they had heard her knocking, but it's company policy to not open the door from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My mom moved on to apartment 2 and told them what happened. The man and his pregnant wife said that they didn't hear anything, despite going to bed at 2 a.m. and having their windows opened. I was somewhat skeptical because my scream was pretty loud, even giving my mom nightmares days after the incident, and all our windows and the second-story door were open. There's another building just a few feet away, so sound resonates pretty loudly, making the construction booming even behind closed doors. And my mother's screams that were loud enough for someone to call the police? I was highly doubtful they didn't hear anything. With the first apartment, it made sense because they only used the first floor, and all the windows were closed due to the air conditioning being on. My mom told the couple to be wary of the construction workers because she believed that they decided to rob us after seeing that my dad was a foreigner, automatically assuming that we were rich or something. The man's face instantly dropped, and his tone turned cold. My mom asked him for the landlord's number since the old number didn't work anymore, and he said he would give it to her after he visited her today since he didn't have it on him. It took him 4 days to finally give us the number, and he did so with what seemed like a sincere apology, saying sorry for taking so long and for what happened to us. That same day, we called the landlord, and she seemed shocked, telling us that nothing like that has ever happened in any of her apartments before. However, my mom had talked to a tenant in the apartment behind us, owned by the same landlord, and she said that she knows of at least 3 people in her complex who have had their place broken into. Later, the maintenance man came to inspect our window, and we found out that the construction workers were hired because they're all members of our landlord's church, and the man who just moved in with his wife is the bishop of their church. Before my mom could even bring up her theory, the maintenance man told her that he was convinced it was the construction workers. We kept realizing that things were missing over the course of 2 weeks, like my backpack, some sunglasses, money, jewelry, some stuff out of our storage room, etc. My phone was also taken. I assumed that when he was crouching over my bed, He was trying to reach for both the phone and the charger since I was probably laying on the wire or something. My laptop and a camera were both sitting on my desk next to my jewelry box, but he didn't take them. My parents assume it's because he was going to take the heavier items when he was about to leave, so he wouldn't have to carry them around. However, I didn't see anything in his hands when he was running away from me, which makes me think they either left the other items by the door for an easy exit or there was someone else in the house helping him. A few weird things. He took 4 of my shirts, 2 of them being exactly the same. He also went into my cousin's room and stole her towel. Thankfully, she had gone home for the summer, so she wasn't around, but it almost seemed as if the thief knew that. He went into her room and my room, but completely avoided my parents' room. I also couldn't get over the fact that he drank our water straight from the jug, which would have made sense since he climbed to the 2nd story. However, this country is notorious for being superstitious, and my mom said that thieves tend to leave water out because it makes the homeowners go into a deep sleep, something about the water resembling the calming waves of an ocean. I've never been one to believe in superstition, and she thinks that's why I was able to wake up. Just a few hours after the incident, we decided that we were going to move back to the States. This wasn't the only occurrence affecting our decision, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm just thankful that we all came out safe and nothing worse happened. I'm also incredibly grateful for my cat since he's basically the hero for waking me up. In fact, my cousins are fighting over who'll get to keep him once we leave. In 2017, I worked at a tanning salon in a strip mall. It was across the street from a Walmart that was always crawling with strange people. The strip mall where my salon was located was poorly lit at night. There was a sushi restaurant and an AutoZone, but other than that, the other stores were vacant. We stayed open until 10 p.m., while the other 2 businesses closed around 8 or 9. The salon was never overwhelmingly busy, so there was always just one person working at a time. My best friend also worked for the company, and the salon she worked at was a 15-minute drive from mine. This detail is important later. Being a night owl, I worked the 3 to 10 p.m. shift every weeknight. At some point, I started getting strange phone calls at 8 p.m. every night. At first, they were odd but nothing alarming. The first time he called, the conversation went like this. Caller, hi, I'm conducting a survey on women's shopping habits, and I figured calling a tanning salon run by women would be a good place to start. We also send out a gift if you participate in our surveys. Me, okay. Caller, do you typically wear jeans, yoga pants, leggings, skirts, shorts, or dresses? Feel free to list which ones you wear. Me, I wear all of those. Caller, great. Now, when you wear dresses or skirts, do you ever wear pantyhose? Me, not unless it's winter. Caller, so, how many tights or pantyhose do you own? Me, I have no idea, like 5? Caller, that's great. Would you be interested in us sending you some free pantyhose? Me, I'm not really interested. I don't wear them enough to care. Caller, okay, totally understand. Would it be okay if I call you for a survey in the future? Me, sure. Caller, when do you typically work? Me, every weeknight. Caller, great. Talk soon. I shouldn't have given a random person my work schedule, but since they were already calling my job, I figured there was no denying that they could find me if they wanted to. Honestly, I didn't think much of the call at the time. Later that month, during a staff meeting, the weekend sales associate mentioned she had received a few weird calls from a guy breathing heavily and asking her questions. She didn't go into detail, so I didn't make the connection. The next few times he called me, it still seemed normal enough. One survey was about skirt lengths and brands, and another was about dress lengths and brands. However, he kept offering to send me pantyhose, even after I repeatedly told him I didn't wear them. He always said, "Okay, I just want to make sure I'm offering them after every call as it's protocol." But the last survey he conducted really scared me. "Caller, when you wear dresses and skirts, do you wear panties?" Me, "Yes." "Caller, what material are they? Silk, satin, cotton, or lace?" Me, I'm really not comfortable with this. I think I'm done with the surveys." "Caller, come on, I just want to know what you wear under that dress." "I'll bring you some panties and nylons right now." Me, "No, thank you. Please do not come here. Goodbye." I hung up and freaked out. I called my friend at the other salon and told her what had happened. She said the same guy had been calling her location, trying to talk to the girls about pantyhose and panties too. She mentioned that he even described to one girl what she was doing while she was on the phone with him. The calls started becoming more frequent and unsettling. He began spoofing numbers and calling at different times of the night. The content of his calls became creepier, with heavy breathing and comments about what we were wearing. I was terrified to be at work alone. One day, the calls stopped entirely. Not long after, a disturbing incident happened that I've always suspected was related. It was 20 minutes before closing when an overweight, middle-aged man with a disheveled appearance walked into the salon. My heart sank. I had an intense feeling that this was the creep. I asked him for his last name, but he said, "I've never been here before." I explained the pricing and packages, though I could tell he wasn't listening. He just stared at me with his mouth open, breathing heavily. He finally asked for the most basic bed for 5 minutes, another red flag. I set up the bed for him and immediately called my friend. She decided to close her salon early and drive over to mine with a steel bat, just in case. While waiting, I was cleaning the rooms near the front. After about 15 minutes, I realized I hadn't heard the man leave. I walked down the hall to check. The room he was supposed to be in was empty. Panicking, I called my friend again, yelling into the phone, "Where are you?" She told me she was pulling into the parking lot. We started checking the rooms together, one by one. When we reached the 6th room, we heard the back door slam shut. We locked it immediately but continued searching the remaining rooms. I'll never know what that man's intentions were that night, but I'm eternally grateful my friend came to help me. This happened to me about 2 years ago when I was 18. I'm a female, by the way, and was in my 2nd week of college. Our school had off-campus buildings where classes were often held, so small buses packed with students and professors going back and forth were common. The ride to those buildings was about an hour long. The buses weren't set up like school buses with paired seats, but had seats arranged around the interior, facing inwards, if that makes sense. Anyway, I was sitting on the bus, ready to head back to the main campus after my class. A man, about mid to late 30s and wearing a suit, entered the bus shortly after me and asked where it was going. I told him, he nodded, and then sat down next to me since it was one of the few seats left. Since the trip was an hour long, pretty much everyone fell asleep, and it was normal, because of the bus setup, for people to accidentally lean on others while sleeping. I fell asleep and woke up about 40 minutes into the ride, only to notice that the man sitting next to me was holding my hand. He was asleep too, and I laughed to myself, thinking he must have grabbed my hand by accident while sleeping. To avoid embarrassing or awkwardly waking him, I carefully tried to slither my hand out of his. However, as I did so, huge red flag, his grip on my hand tightened really tight. It even hurt a little. He was still sleeping, and we were about 15 to 20 minutes away from our destination. Me, being a big chicken and scared out of my mind, decided to put up with it until we got back to school. When we arrived at campus, it was drizzling slightly. I quickly zoomed off the bus and whipped out my umbrella, but the man caught up to me and asked if he could walk under it with me. I thought, this cannot be a coincidence. There were plenty of other people with umbrellas he could have asked. But, being naive, I felt bad because he was wearing a suit. I still chalked up what had happened on the bus to a misunderstanding. We walked under my umbrella, and literally the first thing he asked me was my age. I told him, and he started telling me that he was getting his master's degree in some advanced math field that sounded complicated. I don't remember the details. He then asked for my number. I politely declined and told him I don't give my number to strangers. Get this, he then says, I don't want your number to call or chat with you. I just want friendship, that's all. Friendship. Big nope for me. If you don't want my number for chatting, then what's the point? I was super weirded out. By this time, we approached a large bridge at the school. A few really skinny stray dogs were on it. Out of nowhere, the guy pulls me into a hug and starts shrieking. I shoved him, and he apologized, saying he's scared of dogs. At this point, I was even more terrified and just wanted him gone. As we were about to part ways, he told me his phone wasn't working and asked if he could make an emergency call. Me, being super naive, handed him my phone. He called himself, and his phone started ringing in his pocket. He looked at me with a chilling grin and said, "Hey, now I've got your number." I ended up filing a police report. The officer was super understanding and helped me a lot. He banned the man from taking the buses and placed a no-contact order between us. At first, I thought I might have been overreacting, but after the detective read me the man's statement, I knew I'd done the right thing. He confirmed my story and admitted everything I claimed was true. He even said something like, "Yes, I was aware that I was holding her while we were sleeping. I had no idea she didn't want me to do that since she never said anything. Dude, I was asleep. How could I say anything?" He added, "In my country, where I'm from, India, it's normal to marry younger girls, so I didn't think there was a problem." Buddy, just know. Maybe he was just confused about customs or something, but I feel better talking about this. I hope I don't offend anyone. Thank you. When I was 18, I got a job at Walmart. It was a small town, and there wasn't much else for someone fresh out of high school. I'd been there about a month, working in the jewelry department. My usual shift was from mid-afternoon until the department closed at 9 p.m. I would close the department myself, but since Walmart is open 24 hours, there were always other people around. One night, as I was locking the cases and putting things away, an overnight stalker walked by and said hi. I looked up, smiled, and said hi back before continuing with my tasks. This guy, the only way I can describe him is that he looked like one of the Beagies. Shoulder-length frizzy hair and a kind of bouncy hop to his step when he walked. He was in his mid-50s. This started to become a regular thing. On nights I closed by myself, he'd walk by and say hi, and I would say hi back. That was it. No conversations ever took place. Then, on my birthday, a few friends who worked there got me a cake. I hugged them, said thank you, and we shared a laugh. About an hour later, Mr. Beagies came around with a birthday card, which he handed to my manager to give to me. My manager thought it was hilarious that this odd guy got me a card until I opened it. Happy birthday. I saw you hugging those guys earlier. It made me really mad, but I called a friend and talked it out. He made me realize you're allowed to have friends other than me. Just please don't hug them anymore. Save those hugs for me. I don't know what kind of expression I had on my face, but my manager grabbed the card, read it, and walked me straight to the store manager's office. The store manager dismissed it, saying the guy was probably joking, but he promised to talk to him. I didn't see Mr. Beeges for about a week. Then one night, while I was closing, he dropped a stuffed envelope on my counter without a word and walked away. Inside were 6 pages, front and back, of pure madness. It detailed his entire life story, all about his family and the schools he attended. Mixed in were bizarre claims, like how his sister was psychic and his father was an exorcist. The letter ended with something deeply disturbing. He wrote about a friend who was 18 months old and missing. He claimed she was being harmed because he could hear her screaming his name in his dreams. That letter went straight to the store manager. He had me write a formal complaint and told me to avoid going outside alone or being near the guy during breaks. But that wasn't enough. I wanted him gone. 2 nights later, I was finishing my shift. The counter I worked at had one opening, with counters running along both sides. Mr. Beeges brought a handcart loaded with boxes for my department and deliberately pushed it into the opening, trapping me inside. He just stood there, staring at me while I froze in place. I was riddled with anxiety and terrified of confrontation, but I forced myself to stay calm. After a few moments, he whispered, "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." I turned around and focused on finishing my tasks, pretending he wasn't there, but I could feel his eyes on me. Finally, I looked at him and said, "Weren't you told to stay away from me?" He gave me a gross, predatory grin and said, "Store manager's name," asked me if I was joking. I told him I was. Then he leaned as close as he could and whispered, "But I'm not joking." With that, he walked away. For the next 2 weeks, he would randomly appear wherever I was, even outside of work. I went to the mall, he was there. I went to lunch, there he was. Another department manager told me that he'd been reported by 4 other people over the past 2 years for similar behavior. I went to the store manager again, but he brushed it off, saying the guy was harmless and maybe had a little crush. A little crush? He was in his 50s, and I was 18 or 19 at the time. A week later, I gave my notice and quit. 13 years later, he still works there. The thought of him still gives me the heebie-jeebies. My parents told me this story some years ago, but I had forgotten about it until recently. To provide some context, I was born by a C-section in a fairly decent hospital. At the time, the hospital lacked a supervised parking lot and instead had an open parking space, guarded only by a group of people who often cleaned cars for a fee. Although the C-section itself went well, my mom had to stay several days in the hospital afterward because she got sick. To this day, my dad hasn't forgiven my mom's family for barely showing up to visit or care for her. He never left us alone, as it was sadly common back then for kids to be snatched by either medical staff or random strangers. While it's less frequent now, it was rampant at the time. When my mom and I were finally given the green light to go home, my dad walked her to the parking lot. My mom was holding me, wrapped in blankets, and everything seemed normal, except it was getting dark. Suddenly, they noticed a man approaching them, one hand inside his jacket. The man walked toward them at a seemingly slow pace, but my parents immediately sensed something was off about him. My mom was in no condition to run, and my dad refused to leave her behind if the man attacked. However, they silently decided that my dad would run away with me if the situation escalated. As the man drew closer, my dad pushed my mom in another direction, trying to guide her back toward the hospital. Then the man, in a raspy voice, said, "You've got a pretty baby girl in your arms. May I see her?" This set off all the alarms for my parents. They realized they were in serious danger. I was completely covered in at least 2 thick blankets, so only my mom could see my face. They hadn't spoken to the man before, meaning he must have followed them from inside the hospital. The man began approaching faster, and my parents knew they wouldn't make it back to the hospital in time. No one else seemed to be around to help. Just as they thought they were doomed, one of the parking lot guards rushed to their aid, screaming at the man. The guard was older but strong enough to fight off the creep. The commotion attracted more guards, who surrounded my parents and forced the man to run away. They even chased him until he was nowhere near the hospital. It turned out that the guard had spotted the man from a distance but only realized what was happening when he saw my parents. To this day, my parents are forever grateful to those men. They not only saved my parents from potential harm, but also saved me from being sold illegally or becoming a victim of even darker crimes that I don't want to imagine. The fifth floor. Back in my freshman year of college, I was a fairly trusting person and probably got myself into a lot of bad situations. I was pretty naive and very lucky. However, there was one incident that will always remind me to have better situational awareness. I was walking back to my dorm from a class in the early evening, speed walking because I had another class at 7 p.m. and wanted time to relax beforehand. I had my earbuds in, listening to music, and passed a very tall, broadly built guy on the sidewalk as I was coming up to my dorm. I only took notice of him for a second because he was walking rather slowly and taking up the middle of the sidewalk. I had to step off into the grass to get around, but I don't think I did this rudely. I probably would have forgotten him entirely if the following events didn't occur. I crossed the street, walked up to my hall's entrance, and swiped my key. They warn us not to allow others to tailgate because unauthorized people can get into the building. No one followed this rule, and I didn't want to seem rude by closing the door on someone right behind me. That's when I noticed the guy I had passed earlier was close enough for me to let him grab the door and let himself in. I allowed this, thinking nothing of it because it's something I always did. I lived on the 5th floor, which was a girls-only floor. The genders were separated by floors, so floors 4 and 6 were the men's floors nearest to mine. He and I got on the elevator with a few other people. I pressed the button for the 5th floor and noticed he didn't press any numbers. That's fine, maybe he was getting off on one of the floors before mine, like the others in the elevator. We stopped at the 2nd floor, and a couple left. He didn't get off. We stopped again at the 4th floor, and the remaining person left. He stayed, and we were alone. That's when I started to feel uneasy. He wasn't standing too close or anything, but he seemed to be looking anywhere but at me as we rode up to the 5th floor. I thought it was odd, but it could be explained by mere coincidence. We stopped on my floor, and I exited first, relieved to leave the awkward space and continue on my way. My hall was a Y-shaped building. Upon leaving the elevator, you either went left or right down 2 separate wings. I turned left, as my dorm was about in the center of the left wing. That's when I noticed he was following behind me. Even when I picked up my pace, he kept up with me. Being taller, he wasn't exactly hurrying, but this was what really triggered my paranoia. It felt like he wasn't walking with a destination in mind, and he could have easily passed me if he wanted to. Instead, he maintained a steady distance from me. I was being followed. Panic set in. When I reached my door, I realized how empty my floor was at this time of day. He was going to reach me just as I opened my door, and I decided it would be safer to stay in a public space and scream if I needed to. I could also run further down the hall and take the stairs at the end of the wing. If I opened my dorm door, it would be too easy for him to follow me inside, lock the door, and overpower me. I always kept my keys in my pocket, but as he approached, I swung my backpack off my back so I could leave it if I needed to run, and fumbled around inside it as if I were searching for my keys. I don't know why I tried to act casual, as though I wasn't scared, and pretended I wasn't opening my door because I was terrified of him. Maybe he would pass me and actually be visiting someone further down the hall. Wouldn't I look silly then? That's when he stopped, just 2 yards away from me, past all the other doors, right at mine. He stood there for a moment. I ignored him, my hand fumbling uselessly inside my backpack. I did not look up. Then, he turned, walked back down the way he came, and I heard the elevator door open. Feeling safe enough to open my dorm door without fear he might come charging back down the hallway, I hurriedly got inside and locked the door. I immediately called my mother, needing to feel less alone since my roommate wasn't home. Later, I calmed down and waited until my roommate returned. I skipped my next class because I didn't want to walk in the dark. Initially, I felt good about my quick thinking, but then I realized one really bad, important detail. I shouldn't have stopped at my door. Now, he knew which dorm was mine. I haven't seen him since. But to the stranger who followed me back to my dorm while I was a freshman girl. Creepy Kyle. Sometimes, you're the hero of your own story. Sometimes, you're just a side character and only realize it at the end. Boys and girls, I present to you the ballad of Creepy Kyle. Kyle was kind of chubby, with a buzz cut that was thinning on top and a sad little attempt at a mustache on his lip. He was in his 40s or 50s and just looked like someone's creepy uncle. The restaurant I worked in at the time was family-owned and rather small. Kyle didn't have enough money to order most of the food on the menu, so he ordered an iced tea or some other beverage and sit for hours at the same table. Since the restaurant was so small, you had to bus your own tables, so getting Kyle in your seating was a special brand of torment. It didn't help that he wouldn't leave more than $1 tip, no matter how much he claimed to like the service. We were all favored with his affections at one point or another. Things he would do across the board: touch you on the arm frequently while ordering, untalking 20 to 30 times a minute, pull ponytails, tuck his tip directly into your pocket, etc. If you made eye contact, he was your best friend for life. God help you if you smiled at him. Since he was never outright rude to us, we thought he just had no social awareness and wrote him off as harmless. Alice knew better. Alice was 19, blonde, and petite. The poor girl became the focus of Creepy Kyle's affections. He would always make some excuse to stand by the hostess podium so he could talk to her. He never said anything explicitly inappropriate, but you could tell he was hitting on her and not letting her work. We would always have to tell him to leave her alone because new people had come in and she couldn't seat them with Kyle chewing her ear off. The management refused to do anything about it because they didn't see him crossing any lines, so poor Alice had to suffer in silence. Things escalated over a period of a few months. He sent substances to the hostess podium. May I remind you, Alice is on the job at 19. Told another server that my short hair was cuter and that her hair should be short too. He whipped out a pair of scissors from who knows where and playfully mimed cutting a lock of her hair. The server playfully ran far away and hid in the back while we dealt with him. Surprised me in the bathroom. We had no public restrooms, so the waitstaff had to use a little closet-like space beside the kitchen. I was washing my hands and screamed when I saw him in the mirror. He just laughed and said, hee hee, the door was unlocked, even though he shouldn't have been there in the first place. I was shaking as I reported it to the manager, who told me to take my 10-minute break. Kyle was still there when I came back, so I just went home. Kept trying to bring us food from other restaurants. This was more bizarre than creepy, but none of us were ever going to sample anything that had been through his hands first. It was actually a lot worse for Alice at the time, but none of us knew it because she kept quiet about what happened outside the restaurant. He had somehow obtained her phone number and was calling her to invite her to sports events and other things like that. Sometimes, he would hang around after the restaurant closed to try to see her. Usually, one of us would give her a lift to her bus stop since she had no car, and there was no way we'd let her go alone. One day, he was at the bus stop waiting for her, and the person giving her a lift drove away before she spotted him. When the bus was late, she decided to ditch the stop and walk. He took that as an invitation to walk with her and followed her for half an hour. She was too scared to tell him to leave, so she tried outrunning him, but he always caught up. Finally, she ducked into a store and called one of the other servers to take her home. Things spiraled out of control over 2 days. Day 1, I was walking down the street with my earbuds in, doing some lazy Saturday shopping and mostly just enjoying the sunshine. Someone honked at me. Kyle had been driving alongside me in a dirty orange pickup truck for who knows how long. I froze like a deer as he teased me about how loud my music was. Then, he said, "Hop in the truck, sweetie. I'll give you a ride." I couldn't do anything but shake my head. I quickly ducked into the nearest store and stayed there for 2 hours. I browsed in the aisles farthest from the door and occasionally checked the window. I think he kept circling because sometimes the truck was there and sometimes it wasn't. After he finally left, I sneaked out to my car and drove to a friend's house, where I stayed for hours. Day 2, guess who's seated in my section? I hadn't had the chance to tell anyone about what happened the day before, so no one saw a problem with assigning him to me. My insides filled with dread as I handed this guy his complimentary water, bracing myself for hours of creepiness. Instead, Kyle handed me a large envelope and told me to give it to Alice. It was pink with ribbons printed on it, looking like a wrapped present. My skin was crawling, but I managed to pick it up. Kyle got up and left, so I was almost relieved. I didn't really want to give the envelope to Alice and didn't learn what was inside until much later. I still feel guilty about it today. After my shift, I handed the envelope to Alice and explained the situation, advising her not to open it. She did, after I left. It was a hardcore adult magazine. Kyle had circled one of the model's faces with a marker, writing that it looked just like her and that she should come to his place for a photo shoot. Alice sat down with the managers and told them everything. The managers basically said it was more trouble than it was worth to involve the police and told her it was her problem. Alice quit that night. None of us heard from her after that. I really hope she moved away and isn't in Kyle's basement right now. After she left, Kyle kept coming in. The servers banded together and told management that if they didn't ban him, we'd walk out during Sunday brunch. That finally got their attention. Kyle still tried to come into the restaurant and talk with us, but we immediately turned him away at the door. Thankfully, he left without causing a scene. I didn't learn the full story until much later, and when I did, it terrified me. I live with my girlfriend as expats in a pretty foreigner-friendly Asian country. Most of the time, we get by just fine despite only knowing a little bit of the language because most people we interact with on a day-to-day basis speak fluent English. We started out in a tiny apartment, which we quickly outgrew, and we found a gorgeous condo with nice amenities and decided to move in. This condo is owned and managed by a local owner, rather than by an association or a company. The building is a little bit older, which means that instead of key card access to our door, it came with a traditional key lock and sliding bar latch. This is nice because it's more durable than a chain. Of note, our original building also had key card access to our floor, meaning that we could only ever access our own floor. Even the emergency exit stairwells did not allow entry to floors other than our own. This new place did not include this measure, and I routinely enjoy to walk up the 15 flights of stairs to the room as a bit of a warm-up before going swimming. The quaint feeling of all of this changed about 2 months after we moved in. We were both starting new jobs and dragged our feet on some of the final touches of moving into a place, and that is the last time we ever do that. My girlfriend nudged me awake at about 3 in the morning. I woke up extra groggy and unsure of my surroundings, but I snapped to full attention when she whispered with wide eyes, "Someone is trying to open the door." Now, the condo is 100 square meters, and the main door and the bedroom are at opposite ends. The bedroom itself has a rather sturdy door that was closed, and the aircon runs at night. So, this had to have been some commotion for her to wake up. I sprang out of bed and made it to the door in seconds. I also sleep buck naked, so I awkwardly tried to put on a pair of shorts while I peered through the peephole. There was some guy outside our door, studying very intently at our lock. He was about my height, though probably 15 kilos heavier. And he was not a foreigner like us. Wrong room. I had to yell because the door is pretty thick. There was a pause and then a thud. Then a smaller talk as he was knocking. From experience, I know that it's hard to hear through the darn door, and if English was not his first language, then understanding me through the door was going to be a real challenge anyway. Looking through the peephole as he kept up steady knocking, I noticed he swayed back and forth slightly, so I figured maybe he had a couple of drinks and had the wrong room. I turned to my girlfriend and told her so, and that I was going to open just the key lock but not the bar latch and tell him he had the wrong room. She didn't love the idea, but what was a good alternative? I took a deep breath and undid the key lock. My hand shook as I turned the handle, and one hand braced against the door while the other opened it slightly. He must have been leaning close because I saw his face right at the opening and I could smell beer on his breath. "You got the dash" was what I got out before he pushed against the door as hard as he could. The bar latch held, but it was enough that my girlfriend threw herself against the door, and with our combined force, we shut it again. "No!" I yelled. "Go away. Wrong room." Then he muttered something that sent chills through me. The door muddled the noise, having just woken up played tricks on my ears, and the language barrier filled in the gaps. But I could swear I heard him laugh a little and say, "Stupid boy." I froze. My girlfriend turned the key lock as he slammed his body into the door once, twice, 3 times. I lost count. Every time I pressed against it harder, but I could still swear the 4 screws that held the bar latch in place wiggled slightly. Expats make jokes here about some of the shoddy construction, but this was the first time I really considered it a major concern. The thuds returned, and looking through the peephole, I could see that he was punching the door. His stoic face looked patient and annoyed as he swung his arm back over and over each time it hit. My girlfriend and I could feel the vibration through our entire bodies. This felt like a nightmare, like I was still sleeping. Was this real? Was this guy actually trying to get into our condo? Was I being generous thinking he just had the wrong room? He saw me, a white guy, inside, and he should have caught a glimpse of our kitchen area. Even drunk, he should know this wasn't his condo, right? But what if he wasn't lost? What if he knew exactly what he was doing? What if he came in off the street with someone else and bided his time and waited and tested doors at 3 a.m. until someone was stupid enough to crack one open? Stupid boy. His words echoed in my brain. After what felt like an eternity, the pounding stopped, and I looked through the peephole. He wasn't there any longer. I listened closely and could hear the long ding of the elevator down the hall. He might be leaving. My girlfriend had both our phones, texting the condo owner on hers and shoving mine at me. She was calling the owner, but at 3 a.m. there was no answer. Frantic texts of someone is trying to break in spanned the other end where no one was picking up. She messaged friends of ours who live in the next building, but we both knew it'd be hours before anyone responded to us. This is where I kicked myself. We knew the emergency number, but neither of us had taken the time to collect the local police or the building security. This is a mistake I'll never make again, no matter if I'm starting a new job or whatever the excuse. Having a list of fast response numbers is as big a priority as getting the keys to the place. We calmed down a bit and agreed that we were going to be up the rest of the night, but that we'd settle up with the condo owner in the morning and report to the building management. There were security cameras in the hallways, so they'd be able to follow up. Then I heard the elevator ding again. I was shaking as I returned to the peephole and watched as the chunky man returned. He was hanging up a mobile phone, and he retrieved something from his pocket. A knife? A multi-tool? And that's when I said, "He's back," and I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife within reach and returned to brace the door. My girlfriend was almost in a full-blown panic as she grabbed the cast iron skillet. That's when I realized for the first time that there was a chance that someone was going to die. The door handle was wiggling as he started to poke at the lock with whatever was in his pocket. If he opened one lock, the only thing between him and us would be 4 tiny screws on the bar latch. And if he got into this condo, we were going to defend ourselves as best we could. And that's where I realized we were foreigners, and dealing with manslaughter charges in a foreign court system would be an absolute nightmare. Or if we severely injured him and he was able to communicate his story his way to the police while we struggled with an interpreter. And of course, this was all assuming that we would be the ones to overpower and subdue him. I had no idea who he was on the phone with. What if this guy had friends scouting other rooms in the building? Or what if he was a guest of someone upstairs? Maybe he just told his poker buddies to come down and rough up the helpless foreigners? I measured up my girlfriend with a skillet and myself with a kitchen knife and found myself honestly wondering how many drunk, stocky men we could take. All this was running through my head as I called the equivalent of 911 and shouted English into the phone until someone spoke English. My brain wouldn't quiet down enough for me to be polite. I finally got an operator that spoke English, and I explained someone was trying to break into our condo, that he had left and returned, and gave him the address. He sent a car, and I asked for an ETA, and he couldn't give me one. Great. Thanks for that. It felt like forever holding the key latch shut with one hand, knife on the counter nearby, and phone in the other, waiting for the emergency team to call back. All while listening to his muttering and pounding on the door inches from my head. Looking at the woman I loved next to me, terrified, also wondering what was going to happen in the next few minutes. He wandered off again, but my spider sense was in full alert mode. It wasn't until half an hour later when several people wearing police uniforms and building management jumpsuits knocked on the door that I calmed down even a little. Still, I wasn't sure what to expect. One of the group spoke English while the rest stood back. I explained everything in detail and pointed at the camera in our hallway, saying I wanted whoever it was found. One of the cops pointed at the nearby knife and raised an eyebrow, and I just confidently said, "Yeah. I would have if I needed to." He seemed to smile a bit. After assurances and apologies and promises of follow-up, we received what we should have collected weeks ago, direct phone numbers to our building's security room where cameras are monitored, as well as the local police station and the personal mobile number of our building's security director. The sun was coming up, and our condo owner called my girlfriend to comprehend what was going on. She promised us that she'd set locksmiths there that day to install another deadbolt as well as a second bar lock if it helped us feel safe. The follow-up of everything was that the guy was indeed someone who got drunk and mistook the room and was on the wrong floor. Wouldn't have been an issue if we had keycard access per floor, right? He was apparently known in the building for this. Would have been nice to let us know, huh? His wife had to come collect him more than once, and he would be fined for the cost of installing the extra locks. So while it is a bit comforting to know that he's a random drunk instead of a burglar, I still explained to building management that I have no desire for an apology from him. I don't care if he feels bad. Police reports here can be messy, and locals can hold severe grudges that I did not want to deal with. I will only keep from a full police report if I literally never see or hear from him again. And apparently Stupid Boy was a mix of foreign language and my ears playing tricks on me. Though I'll never truly be 100% sure of that. This happened shortly before substances were legalized in Germany. In Berlin, regulation was already quite loose. As long as you didn't explicitly bother anyone, you usually wouldn't get arrested for smoking in public. I've been smoking daily for years. I know, it's not great, but that's beside the point, so I can function pretty well while stoned. However, I almost never smoke in public, partly to avoid trouble, but mostly because I enjoy the comfort of my own home. One late night, around 3 a.m., I was chilling online with friends, ready to call it a day. I wanted to relax with a joint and one of my favorite shows, but unfortunately, I had no snacks left. Determined to end the night with a proper munchie session, I decided to hit up a nearby Spatty, a small convenience store similar to a 7-Eleven. At that hour, only the sketchiest ones are still open, often operating illegally. I grabbed my coat and keys, but stopped short before leaving. Why not add a little joy to this cold walk? I thought, rolling a small joint. I lit it as I stepped outside, braving the freezing breeze. The area I live in is pretty rough, mostly foreign residents, many from Arabic countries. Poor integration has led to crime and violence being all too common. Even so, I was in good spirits as I strolled toward the flickering neon sign of the Spatty. Just one more intersection to go. A group of men stood at the corner. They looked Middle Eastern, a bit older than me, and watched me as I walked by. It felt normal, nothing to worry about, I thought, already a little high. I crossed the street without giving them much thought. Then, I heard a voice call out, "Routine ID check. Please show me your identification." My heart sank. Of course, this has to happen the one time I smoke in public, I thought, turning to face the police. Only, they were police. It was the group from the intersection, now slowly approaching me. "Routine ID check. Please show me your ID." "We're undercover cops," one of them said with a smug grin. I froze. The fact that they weren't cops became clear when, despite their demand, none of them reached for any identification. "You know smoking substances is illegal, don't you?" the man continued. His pupils were enormous, like saucers. It was obvious these guys had no authority whatsoever. They began circling me. "Show us what's in your pockets," the leader demanded. So, it's a robbery, I thought. As long as I don't resist, maybe I'll only lose my phone and a few bills I brought for snacks. Then, a wave of dread hit me. My weekly tips, about 300 euros in cash, were also in my pocket. I had forgotten to deposit it earlier. Losing that money would crush my tight budget for the month. What now? As I slowly reached into my pocket, the leader pressed me. "What's taking so long?" I pulled out an old pack of gum and some broken headphones, hoping to satisfy them. "Where's your wallet?" "I need your ID," he insisted. Still fumbling, too stubborn and stupid to hand over my tips, I inadvertently revealed something that shocked even me, the glint of a Glock tucked into his belt. Knives and metal rods are typical weapons here, but a gun? That was insane, even by local standards. German gun laws are incredibly strict. My adrenaline spiked. Slowly, I pulled out the €5 bill I'd planned to use for snacks, trying to keep my expression neutral. "You've got no wallet?" he growled, his face darkening. My brain screamed at me to do something, anything, before this escalated further. Then, a desperate thought flashed through my mind. The Arabs in this area had a well-known fear of Russians, with frequent clashes between the two groups. Maybe, just maybe, I could use this. In a heavy Russian accent, I stammered, "My friends have my wallet. They're coming soon, we meet here." To my surprise, their poor English comprehension worked in my favor. They exchanged glances, muttering in German, and decided to wait. I forced myself to look confused, maintaining the bluff. It worked. Their effort to translate or figure me out must have seemed too much trouble. The leader finally pointed at my €5 bill. "All right then, you get us something to drink." Reluctantly, I followed them into the spatty. They grabbed a 6-pack of Coke, and I paid, heart pounding. I was certain this wasn't over, that they'd either search me themselves or retaliate when my non-existent friends didn't show up. But then, just like that, they left. No violence, no further questions, nothing. I stood there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Looking back, I can't believe I bluffed in such a dangerous situation. It could have been my last day on Earth, all over €300. I've learned my lesson. These days, I avoid walking around late at night when the streets are empty. I was about 5 or 6 years old and was at my granddad's Crown Bowling Green. He owned it. It wasn't unusual for me to be there. I tended to go at least twice a month and surprisingly enjoyed spending time with all the old folks there. However, after about 2 hours, I would always get really bored. Next to the bowling green was a giant park that was every child's dream. It was filled with slides, swings, roundabouts, climbing frames, and more. Each time I went, I would beg my uncle to take me there because he always went to the bowling green too. Anyway, enough about the setting. One time, it was my granddad's birthday, November 2nd, and I remember him having his party at the bowling green hut. Once again, after a few hours, I got extremely bored. I asked my uncle to take me to the park, and he agreed. I took a frisbee with me, and while we were there, I noticed something moving in the trees. Being an adventurous person, I decided to throw my frisbee into the trees so I could retrieve it and see what or who was there. My uncle said that was fine as long as I didn't take too long, or something along those lines. I ran into the trees, only to be greeted by 3 men and a woman. I think they were between 17 and 20, although at 5 years old, my sense of age wasn't great. 2 of the men stood close to me, while the other 2 people were a bit farther back. One of the men asked if I could be their friend, and I immediately said yes. I was a lonely child. Then I noticed something odd, something that didn't seem alarming at the time but feels terrifying in hindsight. One of the men was holding a lighter and a rope, while the other appeared to have scissors in his pocket. The woman behind them spoke and asked if I would play with them. I nodded or said yes, something like that, but then started walking backward. I hadn't yet picked up my frisbee, so one of the men in the front threw it farther behind him. At the time, I didn't realize it, but they were clearly trying to set a trap. I told them I needed to ask my uncle if I could play longer, then turned and ran through the trees. When I glanced back, I saw the 2 men from the front were following me. I immediately told my uncle everything, and as soon as they noticed him, they ran for their lives. My uncle was a big, built man, so they didn't stand a chance. He grabbed my hand and took me into the bowling green hut, where he called the police. About an hour later, the police arrived, searched the park briefly, and told us the group had likely run away. They advised us to call again if anything else happened. That night, the bowling green hut was broken into. It could have just been a massive coincidence, but I still wonder. I should also mention that my uncle remembers most of what I told him, but I still vividly recall the conversation I had with those people and their faces. This story isn't as crazy as some others on here, but I think it fits. This happened several years ago, I think in 2009 or 2010. One summer evening, I spent the day with my girlfriend at her house. I ended up leaving around 10 or 11 p.m., so it was quite dark out. Before I drove off, my girlfriend hung out with me in my car for a few minutes. My car was an early 90s Dodge or Pontiac sedan, and it didn't have automatic locks. When my girlfriend stepped out, she didn't lock the door again. I drove off, and instead of taking the back road home like I usually did, I decided to take the main road. Since it was late, there weren't many cars out. However, I saw a woman standing next to a bus stop. She was pacing in a circle, and I got the sense she was anxious or nervous about something. When she saw my car, she flagged me down. I pulled over and reached over to roll down the window, no automatic windows either. That's when I noticed the door was unlocked, and before I could react, the woman opened the passenger door and got in. I was surprised, but didn't feel immediately threatened. She was white, with blonde hair, and probably in her late 30s or early 40s. I asked her if she was okay or needed help. She explained that she was trying to get home, but her phone had died, so she couldn't call anyone. She also mentioned that she missed the last bus. This seemed plausible, and since she didn't appear threatening and was already in my car, I offered to drive her home. I started driving and asked for directions. We'd been on the road for maybe 2 minutes when she directed me to turn into a residential neighborhood. As we drove, she started talking nonstop. "Thank you so much for stopping. Not everyone is as nice as you. You're real cute, you know that? Your car is super awesome, too." I replied with a weak, yeah, thanks. She continued, "It's so nice to find someone so trusting this late at night. I like trusting people." At that point, we came to a stop sign. I looked left and then right. When I turned back, she gave me a creepy, ear-to-ear Joker-like smile. For the first time, I noticed her pupils were very dilated and darting all over the place. That's when it hit me, picking up a stranger this late at night, who might be under the influence of substances, was probably a terrible idea. I started thinking of ways to get her out of the car, but I didn't want to be rude. I know, I was young and dumb. Before I could act, she asked for my phone to call her friend and let them know she was coming home. I sheepishly lied and said I didn't have a phone. Just my luck, a moment later, someone texted me, and my phone went off. "I thought you didn't have a phone." "Oh, I forgot I had it. I thought I left it at home." "I don't appreciate being lied to," she trailed off, and her tone sent a chill down my spine. We were deep in the neighborhood now, and it was pitch dark. I needed to get her out of the car. She pointed up the road and told me to turn right at the next stop sign. The road curved slightly, and I saw a dead-end sign ahead. For some reason, the idea of turning onto that street terrified me. I came up with a plan. Right before the stop sign, I pulled over and told her my car was making a funny noise and the temperature gauge was going up. I turned off the engine, popped the trunk, and asked if she could step out and hold a flashlight while I checked the engine. My heart was pounding, but I tried to keep my voice steady. She looked annoyed but got out. I rummaged in the trunk for a few seconds, pretending to look for something. Once she was in front of the car, I closed the trunk and walked to the hood with a flashlight. "Oops, I forgot to pop the hood." "Let me do that real quick," I said. I got back in the car, popped the hood, and immediately started the engine. I threw the car into reverse and backed away quickly. She just stood there, staring at me. Once I had enough distance, I put the car in drive and sped off. As I passed her, she was standing under a streetlight. That's when I noticed she was holding a knife. A large man stepped out of the shadows and joined her. At first, I thought she might be in trouble, but then they walked away together. Looking back, I know this was 100% my fault. Letting her into my car was incredibly stupid, and agreeing to drive her home was even worse. I don't know why she didn't try to harm me earlier. I don't know if they were planning to carjack me or do something worse.